December 1984, Cumru Township, Pennsylvania. The body of a strangled woman is dumped in a ravine. For 20 years, the case of Jane Doe lies dormant until a cop and a psychic join forces.
I started to see lines of light across a map, and I saw the Brooklyn Bridge.
Can a psychic's map locate a killer and solve a 20-year-old murder? Cumru, a small township in rural Pennsylvania. The solving of the Jane Doe case began in an unorthodox way, with an inquiry into the unrelated homicide of a local man. Murder is an unusual occurrence in this community. More unusual is the fact Detective Robert Warner, for the first time in his career, is going to meet with professional psychic Lauren Thibodeau. She has been working with the dead man's family. That's why Warner is here, hoping to find some answers.
I figured I'll use every tool I can to solve a crime. And at this point here, I figured I had nothing to lose, so let's go down and talk to Dr. Lauren and see.
Despite his optimism, Warner is not about to go advertising the visit just yet.
At that time, I didn't know how people would react, so I kept it to myself.
In fact, he didn't even tell Lauren his reason for the visit.
I didn't say anything about that case when I first walked in. She didn't even know I was a police officer. I walked in and sat down, and she knew I was there for a reading. And actually, Dr. Lauren asked me if I was in law enforcement and if I was a police officer, and I said yes.
As Warner hadn't identified himself, there's no way Lauren could have known he was a cop.
That's when she said, well, you're working on 2 cases, and one of them's very old, like put on a shelf for many years. And I was only working on 1 at the time, so I first said, no, I only have 1 case.
I said, no, there's 2 cold cases here, 2. And he said something like, well, I only have this one, but keep talking. So I did.
This lady's crazy. I'm here for 1 I can't solve. But yes, at first it was like, no way, but when you hear something like that, it's always on your mind now for the rest of the reading. You're picking your brain trying to figure out, what is she talking about? What is she talking about? And then I remembered this other case that we had that I wasn't even working on. And I told her I wasn't working on that, but she said that that's going to be being worked on. She actually saw that one being solved. So at that point there, I was excited.
The second case that Lauren referred to was an unsolved homicide dating back to 1984. That year, as residents of the small community of Cumru Township prepared for the holidays, a body was dumped on the outskirts of town. Discovered 2 days before Christmas, the victim had been strangled and meticulously bound with rope. She was wrapped in a green army-style blanket and wrapped again in a paint-splattered drop cloth. An autopsy revealed that the woman was about 30 years old and had a history of abusing drugs. Forensic investigation, which was still in its infancy, revealed no clues to the killer's identity. With no means of identification, the victim was referred to as Jane Doe, a standard police procedure in the U.S. She was buried in a local cemetery. At the time Jane Doe was murdered, Lauren was a young woman at college living in a different state. Warner was blown away by the fact that Lauren had any inclination about the case.
She's talking about the 2 cases that we have, which floored me. For her to even say that, how does she know that we have 2 cases? And one's been sitting on a shelf for 15 or 20 years. And that's when I contacted her the following day.
It was in that phone conversation that I started seeing green little lights traveling across Route 78. It was as if I was looking at a map of New Jersey, New York, and eastern Pennsylvania. And as it moved across, I looked upward, sort of upward toward the Brooklyn Bridge. And I could feel, and even smell the energy of the city, and that we were dealing with, New York.
Lauren was not only able to give a sense of place, she was also able to give some clue as to the killer's occupation.
And I remember asking Detective Rob if one of the people that they thought it might have been could have been a truck driver, because I was shown that this was somebody who would have, I kept seeing the side of a cab of a truck.
So at this point here, I thanked her and left it go at that. I still did not have the case. A few months later, my sergeant had pulled the case out and put it over on my desk and told me, since you're going to be here a while, you might as well start working on this and see what you can do with it.
2 months after Lauren predicted it, Warner was assigned the Jane Doe case. The other case, the murder he went to see Lauren about in the first place, remained unsolved. But for now, Warner focused on the unidentified woman's case. Lauren had also envisioned a truck driver, and sure enough, one of the prime suspects in the original investigation was indeed a truck driver.
Back in '84, there was a truck driver that was going around picking up young ladies with reddish-brown hair, strangling them, and dumping them out of his truck. After they were able to capture the truck driver, he admitted to all the ones that he did. He said he was not in Pennsylvania. There was no way of proving he was in Pennsylvania, so we knew it wasn't him. The actual ligatures were tied differently. At that time, there was no connection.
Did Lauren get it wrong? Was her vision of the truck driver the man who had already been cleared in the case? Or was she right? Was the woman's murderer simply a different truck driver? And the big question, where was the killer right now? Cold cases are notoriously problematic. Memories fade, evidence becomes contaminated, witnesses die.
You got to understand, when the first time that this information came up, I didn't even know Jane Doe's name.
Without the victim's name, there was virtually no chance of ever nailing the killer. But there was one positive to working a 20-year-old crime. Forensics technology had come a long way in the last decade. When Detective Robert Warner started investigating a local murder in Cumru Township, Pennsylvania, he never expected to be hurled back 20 years to an unsolved homicide. Professional psychic Lauren Thibodeau predicted that Warner would be working on an old, unsolved case. Now he was. The case of Jane Doe, a woman who had been strangled, tied up in a blanket, and dumped over an embankment.
Basically what it was it got it fired up in me. And I think my sergeant, when I came back and told him after the reading I had the first time with Lauren about the two cases and so forth, I think it kind of all just went together.
Lauren's vision of the Brooklyn Bridge clearly indicated a New York connection to the case. There was also the map highlighting Route 78, and she sensed that the murderer was a truck driver. As to how psychics see visions, they're all different.
Many people see it visually, others perceive it in a telepathic, auditory way. Others get a real gut sense, they literally have a gut clench. Many people have what I call sort of a field feeling, like from the skin out. They have, the tingles or something. So there are at least 4 different ways people perceive it.
Warner's first challenge was to put a name to the victim. The 1984 autopsy had revealed that the woman was a drug addict, 20 years on. Could this help the police find her real identity? Warner reckoned there was a reasonable chance that she had a criminal record. If that was the case, her fingerprints would be on file. AFIS is the national database of all criminal fingerprints. It didn't exist when the woman was murdered in 1984. Warner submitted her fingerprints, and sure enough, she had been arrested on a minor drug offense.
Dispatch gave me Margaret Calciano and Margaret Gravassi. Gravassi was Margie's married name. She was married for about a year in the 70s. So with those two names at that point, I have a computer system where I can go in and I can type in the names in the certain states. And I typed in Brooklyn, New York, and typed in her married name, and I didn't come up with anything. I come up with a few Gravassis. I tried calling, and no one knew Margie at that point. So then I took her maiden name, which was Calciano, entered that in to my system, and came up with probably 250 names in Brooklyn. And the first name I called was her mother.
He says, do you have a daughter named Margaret? I says, yes. I said, who's calling? And he says, I'm a detective from Pennsylvania. And he said, I hate to tell you this, Miss Calciano, but we found your daughter in 1984. And I says, okay. I says, what do you mean found her? He says, well, she was murdered.
For 20 long years, Joan Calciano lived the fear and dread only a mother can comprehend. The sheer horror of never knowing if her daughter was alive or dead. Now, finally, the wait was over.
It was a relief because at least I knew, I knew in my heart she wasn't alive, but I didn't know where she was. And a lot of things go through a mother's mind, and I just thank God she was cut up and never been found, or buried and never been found, and, just so many things went through my mind. But I miss her, She was such a beautiful girl. She could have had anything in life. Yeah, but that was it.
Here's a woman who lost her daughter 20 years ago, and she said the last time she saw her was December 19th, 1984, and she got into an argument with her, slapped her on the face, and she ran out the door, and that was the last she saw her. And it haunted her ever since that was the way her and her daughter split.
The next day, Warner and his partner drove to Mrs. Calciano's apartment in Brooklyn.
She welcomed us in, and there were friends and family members there, and we sat around the kitchen table, and we showed her photos just to make sure that she could ID and say that, yes, that's my daughter. Showed her photos from the autopsy.
And we had to ID it, and it was her. And it was hard, to identify her.
And then we got down to brass tacks, and we asked them who was involved in this.
He asked me if I had any idea who killed her, and I said yes. And I gave him the guy's name.
With this information, could Warner find the killer? For almost 20 years, the file on an unidentified female murder victim lay dormant. The Cumru Township Police Department had reached a dead end until Detective Robert Warner met with professional psychic Lauren Thibodeau. Spurred on by Lauren's visions, and with some good old-fashioned police work, Warner was able to identify the woman as Margie Calciano. Margie's family were able to identify who they thought was her killer.
All of them said without a doubt, Peter, and they gave us the last name of Iosa. Peter was last seen with her. He was, from what the family at that time had told us, he was fatally attracted to her. He would get upset if she was with someone else. He was quite older than her. He was 20 years her senior.
He was obsessed with my daughter, and I knew that he had killed her because he disappeared the same day she did, and that was December 19th.
He supposedly was a very hothead. He would snap, and he slapped her around before.
She was doing coke, and he was giving her money to buy it. And when she needed money, he gave it to her. And he swore nobody would ever have her, and he made sure of that. Yeah.
So we kind of had a good feeling that he was a good suspect. When we left, we just didn't know how to find him. We returned back to our station the following day, and I started working on it, and I couldn't find the last name of Peter Iosa anywhere in New York. I couldn't find it anywhere in the United States.
According to the Census Bureau, there are 555,864 Peters living in the United States. All Warner has to do is find the right one. And all he has to go on are Lauren's visions. A truck, the map with the beam of light, and the Brooklyn Bridge. Warner calls Lauren.
I remember talking to him by telephone not long after about this situation and getting that very visual movie feeling. As he was describing things that he knew about this case, I began to see imagery of a truck driver. Not a big guy, this one. I didn't get a sense of big hulking. You know, on the slender side, definitely a smoker. And I remember seeing the white door of a truck opening, and as if I was looking over the shoulder of the driver stepping out. A thickly quilted sort of plaid, like a thick flannel shirt that you might wear instead of a coat in wintertime. Definitely felt like winter to me. It was very clear that we were at a crisp, cool, almost like could smell lake water near it. And we were at a truck stop somewhere near water. And I guess in this case it would have been the Great Lakes. That region would be on the way. It's almost like a psychic profile of him. I do feel he's a repeat killer. Certainly a lot of sexual violence, you know, rape, assault, that sort of thing.
The revelation that this might be the work of a serial killer, as opposed to a one-off crime of passion, upped the ante for Warner. He was now in a race against time.
We have to get him. We need to get him off the street. If he's killed once and he's going to do it again, and how many has he done in between? It's like any law enforcement officer, anyone actually, that, you know, you want to get this guy off the road, off the streets. He's a danger. There's not a female around that's safe as long as he's out there.
In an attempt to get Pete's last name, Warner phoned Joe Drezick, an ex-boyfriend of Margie.
And he said that he didn't know the name, but he knew that Pete had filed a complaint against him one time, and that the police may have it on record if they'll find it from way back then. So at that time, I contacted New York PD, gave them the information that I had, and they were able to come up with a report and fax it to me in a couple of days, and it came back with Peter Williams.
Warner used Williams' social security number to track the fugitive. He discovered Williams was drawing welfare checks in Milwaukee, and he had been a truck driver, just as Lauren had predicted. One of his main routes had been Brooklyn to Wisconsin, which would have taken him past the Great Lakes. Once again, Lauren's visions proved to be uncannily accurate. With Lauren's help, Warner has gotten this far. He has a name, Peter Williams, and a face. But has he got the hard evidence needed to convict the man he believes murdered Margie Calciano? At any given time, there's well over 20,000 women missing in the U.S. Margie Calciano was just another statistic. And for 20 years, she didn't even have a name. Were it not for the collaboration of Detective Robert Warner and professional psychic Lauren Thibodeau, the chances are Margie would have faded into history as an unidentified victim. The combination of psychic intervention and solid conventional police work produced a prime suspect, Peter Williams.
When I first met Pete and I walked up to him, I advised him who I was and the reason why I wanted to talk to him, and the blood drained from his face. You could see him just literally turn white. He was just pale, and it became quite nervous. He said the last time he saw Margaret, took her to a methadone clinic, and she got out of the car, and that was the last he saw her. And he said he washed his hands of her. And those words, when he said I washed my hands of her, made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. he said he didn't deny being intimate with her, but what he did deny was killing her.
Warner needed more than suspicion to nail Williams. He needed hard evidence, and he had it. When he took on the case, all the evidence was resubmitted back to the lab. Improved forensics technology revealed a single hair embedded in the army blanket used to wrap Margie. To prove it belonged to Williams, he needed to get a DNA sample.
He felt like he had that licked because he wasn't denying having sex with her. What he was denying was killing her. So he was willing to give us the DNA samples. He didn't know we had the hair at that point. And after the fact, prior to leaving, I basically had told him flat out that we felt he's the one that did this. We knew that he probably wouldn't stay in Milwaukee long, and he didn't. He left a few weeks after we were there.
The DNA analysis proved positive. The single hair embedded in the blanket that encased Margie Calciano matched the DNA sample taken from Williams.
When we arrested him in Tucson, he looked at it. He didn't say a whole lot. He didn't say he wasn't guilty at that point. What he said was he read the probable cause and saw the hair. And I think that's what floored him. I think he realized that he had it at that point.
The DNA profile of the hair recovered from the green blanket matched the DNA profile of Peter Williams. Based on your affiant's investigation, information that your affiant has received and the DNA profile results which were received from mitotyping technologies matching the recovered hair from the green blanket wrapped around the victim and the DNA profile of Peter Williams, I am requesting an arrest warrant be issued for the suspect, Peter Williams.
You do what you gotta do. Huh? Couple of mistakes.
Well,
I'm saying a couple of mistakes.
Peter Williams was charged with first-degree murder and taken back to Pennsylvania. A month before he was due to face trial, Williams died of cancer. Once again, he had cheated the scales of justice.
I wish we could have gone to trial because I would have rather him been found guilty by a jury. It would have been better for the family and friends that way. It would have been a definite closure.
I felt I was cheated when he killed her and not knowing where she was all those years. And then I wanted to see his face in the courtroom. I wanted him to see me, and which I felt I got cheated again, you know, and it was hard. I mean, I felt very bad. I broke down and cried because I didn't want it to go that way. I wanted him to see me, but it didn't work. So naturally, I felt I was cheated again, you know.
When Margie Calciano had been positively identified, at the request of her mother, her body was exhumed. Today, she is buried in Greenwood Cemetery in Brooklyn, just blocks from her mom's home.
And it was funny because when we were up in Brooklyn, we're sitting, and I'm looking at the Brooklyn Bridge, and that's when it dawned on me, and I started thinking about all the things that Dr. Lauren told me that fit. Even though prior to that, it didn't sink in and I wasn't using it. But after I sat there and thought about it, I thought, okay, the Brooklyn Bridge, I just went down the line and all the pieces started fitting in.
I think where people get stuck is that it's psychic and it must be somehow bigger or more magical than something else, and it's not. It's just a different way of getting information.
You'll get bits and pieces of information. It's all fragmented. And what you have to do is, it's like a puzzle. It's like a jigsaw puzzle. And you have to sit down and try and place these things into your case. Once you sit down and you can pop in all the pieces, you'll solve your crime.
I would say the best attitude for success is one of very practical, if this can help me solve a case, I'll use it, right? It should be seen as a tool, not as a solution to a case. Psychics do not solve the crimes. The police do that. Where we have help, I think, is sorting out the wheat from the chaff.
Would we have solved the case if I didn't go to Dr. Lauren? It's kind of strange how things work. It's like it's meant to be, you know? It's like things happen for a reason.
Every suspect is innocent until proven guilty. Because Williams died before going to trial, nobody can say for certain if Peter Williams killed Margie Calciano. And there's another twist to the story. Again, because there was no trial, authorities are not allowed to submit Williams' DNA to the national database. So other police officers trying to solve other cold cases will never be able to cross-check Williams as a suspect. So we may never know for certain if and how many times he killed. School's out, and 14-year-old Rachel Domas is running late. She misses her bus and starts the 3-mile walk home. She never makes it. Although there's no evidence of foul play, the pressure is on Detective Gary Miko to find the girl quickly.
Didn't have a crime. We didn't have a victim. We didn't have evidence of anything.
But psychic Nancy Weber claims to see a crime unfolding.
I know he's the killer.
Can the rookie cop and the seasoned psychic team up to find the missing girl? Long Valley, New Jersey, the sort of place where no one locks their doors, a safe place to raise a family. So when 14-year-old Rachel Domas misses her school bus and doesn't return home, police don't immediately fear the worst. Her parents have called the police to report her missing, but the most likely explanation, Rachel is just out with her friends and has forgotten to check in with her parents.
Phone rings, and it was the vice principal of the high school, who I had a rapport with, who I knew quite well, asked me what we were doing about the missing girl. I believe 2 or 3 of her girlfriends were in his office at the time and were encouraging him to give us a call to try and find out what happened, because they knew her and she wasn't that type of a girl.
The call from the principal disturbs Miko. He goes straight to Rachel's home to meet with her parents.
You had the immediate sense that something was wrong. The parents know their children well, and they're telling you something's wrong, then something's wrong. I remember seeing a photo of her on a wall. I recognized the face. The previous year, she was in grade school, and she walked to school, and we had a school post where we crossed kids in the morning and then crossed them again in the afternoon. So there's a definite human factor that comes into play, and also just knowing her personality as little as I did, I couldn't imagine her as a person who would run away from home. Walked into her bedroom, looked for any kind of luggage missing, clothing missing, a note, any sign of her running away. And everything was intact. The only thing missing were the clothes that she wore to school that day and her books.
Across town, psychic Nancy Weber's phone rings. It's a friend of the missing girl's family, and the woman is frantic.
Oh my God. This girl, Rachel, who lives down the block from us, hasn't come home from school. She's missing. I'm listening to this voice. And as I listen to the voice, images start flashing before me. I hear the scuffling, and I know it's leaves, and I know the smell of it is woods. I hear his voice. I see his eye wandering. I don't see his whole face. The smell of him, it's a smell of autos and gasoline, and everything moves very quickly, like rushing torrents of film, and that's why I have to go back over it and slow it down.
Nancy envisions a young woman, but she's not sure if it's the missing teenager.
And what can I do to confirm the image I have? Because I had an image of a girl. photo. So I said to her, listen, do you have a photo of her? I can get her yearbook. Okay, so I'll put the woman to work, and I'll be able to see if the photo matches what I see in my mind.
Meanwhile, Detective Miko is totally unaware of Nancy's visions. All he knows is a girl has gone missing, and yet somebody, somewhere, must have seen her.
What I needed to do is try and find someone that saw her. If she missed the bus and she was walking, let's try and track down some witnesses that saw this person, our missing person, walking from the high school, that few-mile walk to her home. And that was my goal.
Rachel's route home would have taken her past a busy service station. Miko heads straight there.
Most people aren't home during the week, during the day. So let's start with someone that you know is up and down the street on a pretty consistent basis. And what I came up with was the owner of the station and several employees telling me they saw a vehicle, a green Volvo, parked up a hill off of Fairview Avenue, just off the roadway into the woods just slightly. And it was there for several hours during the course of the day. They recognized the vehicle as belonging to a former employee of the gas station, Michael Manfredonia. And he actually walked into the station that day, claiming his car broke down and needed some help. Maybe he saw her, maybe he drove past her. Maybe he was a witness. That was my hope, that he saw her. I found out that he lived in Chester Township, the next town over. And I rang up the detective there to get a little background on Michael. And he called me back and said that he was arrested for, I believe, receiving stolen property. I asked for Michael's address and wanted to stop by and visit him. He supplied that information. I hung up the phone. I was getting ready to go, and the detective called back from Chester Township, telling me that Michael was in their headquarters at the moment, just walked in and was checking on the status of his community service.
Miko is feeling lucky. He's got his first solid lead. He brings Manfredonia in for questioning. It's only been 3 hours since Miko was first assigned to the case. A gut instinct tells him that the man he's talking to might be somehow involved with the disappearance of Rachel Domas.
He wrote an incredibly detailed statement, almost covering each minute that he was there. He tells me his vehicle breaks down. He's able to back it up a hill off the roadway, walk around for 2 or 3 hours, got back at his vehicle, started it, and drove home. How does that happen? How does that happen? And I asked if he had possibly saw this girl walking at any point in time, and he told me no, he didn't think so. I remember asking, are you sure with all that walking around that you did, you didn't see her anywhere? You didn't pass her? You didn't, when you were near your vehicle, when you were walking on Fairview Avenue? Because I understand she missed the bus and you didn't pass by her? And the answer was no.
Miko calls in another detective for help, George Duker.
I was in a meeting and he said, I need your help now. I need you right now. And he had some bad feelings about this missing person case and I came to headquarters, he briefed me, and ultimately I had those same bad feelings.
20 miles away, Nancy Weber is about to have her worst suspicions confirmed by the friend of Rachel's family who had originally contacted her.
There's a knock on my door. The woman comes in. She has a yearbook in her hand. She opens to the photo of Rachel, and I look at it. I instantly know it's confirmed that the images I have, for me, match it.
Nancy is certain the girl is dead. Now she needs to convince police she can help. Every cop knows the first 48 hours in a missing persons case are critical. Evidence is still fresh, people's recollection of events still intact. It's been less than 10 hours since 14-year-old Rachel Domas was last seen at her high school. Detective Gary Miko might have a witness, but there's no evidence of foul play. Nobody even knows if the girl is alive or dead. At the exact same time, psychic Nancy Weber has a clear and terrifying vision of the girl's plight.
And the image was a sequence of his grabbing her and repeatedly, I think, raping her but along with the vision, the name Michael.
Weber has no way of knowing that the police have a man named Michael in custody, but she has no doubt that she has been a psychic witness to a monstrous crime. She wastes no time contacting authorities. She calls the one police officer she knows she can trust.
And I call Ross English, who was chief of detectives at Mount Olive at the time, and I worked with him on a lot of cases. I said, "Hey, Ross, I just got some woman who came to me who showed me a photo of Rachel Domas in Long Valley. She's been missing since yesterday, I think. She's in the woods." He said, "Let me make some calls, I'll be back." I'm praying I'm wrong and that Rachel shows up somehow.
Back in Long Valley, detectives Gary Miko and George Duker are still questioning Michael Manfredonia. He's being very polite and says he wants to help, but the detectives feel certain he's hiding something.
George was a little more direct with him on trying to be clear.
We just weren't buying it up front. He was talking about how his car had broke down, and he had worked nearby in the area, and he took a walk toward Norwright Road. Just none of it really made sense. And at the same time as he's speaking, we're thinking about her possible actions as she left school that day. And the time frame and all of that just truly had us believing that this individual was involved.
And finally Michael said, "I want a lawyer."
Officers have been sent to search his home and car, but they turn up nothing. In the middle of it all, Gary Miko gets a call from Ross English. He tells him Nancy Weber's horrific story.
Yeah, it was sort of like, yeah, okay, Ross, I'll give her a call. And I believe I put the note in my pocket. And at some point in time, I would give this person a call. Again, I believe my job at that point was just to track down people that could have seen her, witnesses. So I didn't call this psychic back right away.
Even if Gary had called Nancy right away, there was no way they could hold Michael Manfredonia any longer.
And it was so frustrating because here we had a suspect that we truly believed was responsible for something we didn't even know yet. Certainly nothing good. But we didn't have her.
Then the real kicker. The detectives are given an ultimatum by their boss. Charge Michael Manfredonia or let him go.
12, 14 hours after he was initially picked up, we were directed to release him and take him home.
It's 3 a.m. Miko and Duker reluctantly drive Manfredonia home. They're both certain they're making a big mistake.
Gary and I got in the car and we drove him home and we dropped him off, and we just had such bad feelings about dropping him off.
And we didn't want to let it go. And there's an abandoned railroad bed that runs parallel to Fairview Avenue. And George and I, in an unmarked patrol car at 4 a.m., still drove slowly down this railroad bed, just looking for any sign, any evidence of a crime, maybe our victim walking, anything. We didn't want to let it go. And that was the last thing we did that day, that long day.
Friday morning, 8 a.m., 17 hours since Rachel Domas was reported missing. Gary Miko remembers the note about the psychic. He gives her a call.
I have a completely open mind. If a psychic has something to offer, I've got an ear.
Finally, I could say something. I needed somebody to say something to.
She said to me, "I'm going to tell you something that I didn't tell the family, and I wouldn't do that. She's dead." And a boy named Michael did it.
Miko is stunned. He and Duker had a man named Michael in for questioning for hours. If Nancy is right, he had almost certainly released the girl's killer the night before and given him a ride home.
How did she know that? How did she get that? No one knew that we had a Michael in custody.
Gary appeared over the phone to be, I need this, I need more, give me more. And at the same time I heard this groan of, oh, we had him for hours here, we were questioning him.
But so far the police haven't any evidence that there's been a crime, yet Nancy claims to have seen it take place.
I am watching in-sequence event of someone, male, exploding all at once. felt like this is somebody who had contained most of his rage to a degree and then just blew it all at once.
At the same time that Miko is talking to Weber, George Duker is leading a team scouring the area where Michael's car was last seen.
I got a radio transmission from one of the search teams telling me that they just found her pocketbook in the woods. I immediately raced from where I was to where they were and had entered into the woods. I get out of my police car. I'm running now in the woods toward the search team. They call me back again. We just found one of her shoes. I'm thinking at this point, this is tremendous. She came home from school late. She, for whatever reason, was in the woods. She tripped, she fell, she broke her leg, she couldn't get up, she couldn't get help. And then I go to the crime scene, and they're all standing there in just disbelief, looking at how he had partially buried her body. What he had done to her, the trauma of that homicide, was just unbelievable.
I was awoken by a phone call from one of our officers who was upset. They had found her body. They had found her buried, partially buried in a hole, like a big ditch, and partially covered. And I was on my way in. I dismissed everybody, and I sat with her body, her and I, for about an hour and a half, while we got forensic people on site, and we brought them in closer and closer. On the way, checking every rock, twig, stone, branch, anything we could that might be of evidential value. You arrive at the scene, and now what you're hoping you wouldn't have to see, you have to see. What you're hoping you wouldn't have to deal with, you have to deal with.
With the incredible accuracy of Nancy's visions in his mind, Miko knew immediately what he had to do.
Now you need to put a case together at this point in time. You need to find your suspect. Michael's your suspect. Michael's the only person so far that was put there.
We knew we then had to find him again. So it was all there. It was all there.
Gary, Miko, and George Duker rush to the Manfredonia home, but he is not there. His parents tell them that earlier in the day he had walked back into the heavily wooded mountainous area behind the home, but no one had seen him since. The detectives are devastated. 24 hours ago they had a criminal but no crime. Now they have a crime but no criminal.
I don't know why he decided to just take a walk. There was no press involved in terms of her body being located.
Once again, police assemble search teams, but this time they are looking for prime suspect Michael Manfredonia.
We had dogs, tracking dogs involved, and we were unsuccessful that day, I believe it was Saturday, and didn't locate him at all on Saturday or any sign of him.
Miko replays the conversation with Nancy Weber earlier that day. She'd said the killer smelled like oil and gasoline, and that fits. Manfredonia worked in a gas station. She knew his name was Michael, and long before police had the evidence, Nancy Weber knew that Rachel was dead. Could she also hold the key to where the killer was hiding out?
And she had said to me, just bring me something that he touched, that he handled, some personal belonging. And, maybe that would help me, tell you where he is.
I could not tell him where Michael was. I needed to make the contact with a person who had connections with Michael. And through that link, I can travel.
Before Detective Miko could officially meet with Weber, he needed permission from the county prosecutor.
We never used a psychic before on anything. So this would have been a first. And clearly with a major case, you needed to get approval from at least our prosecutor's office before any of that interaction could happen.
Sometimes when I work with law enforcement, I know that I work far better with them than I work with some of the families, and that I get far more results when I work with law enforcement because they're in direct contact sometimes with the evidence, even if they didn't see the killer or know it. They've touched the evidence in some way.
And the prosecutor wasn't getting a good feeling about this at all. He didn't like that type of attention drawn to the homicide case, thought that it would get too much media, too much hype. It wasn't the direction that he really wanted to go. Gary and I then talked privately, and Gary said, "What do you think?" And I just said, "Do what you got to do. How can it hurt? How can it hurt? She might have some information here that will absolutely, turn this thing around." And he went off to see Nancy.
Gary Miko decides to defy the prosecutor and set up a meeting with Nancy. The discovery of Rachel Doma's body has turned the case of the missing girl into a full-scale homicide investigation. Prime suspect Michael Manfredonia has disappeared. Going against a direct order from the county prosecutor, Detective Gary Miko arranges a meeting with psychic Nancy Weber. He thinks she might hold the key to finding the murderer. But as he travels to meet her, doubts begin to creep in.
Was there something that she knew about this crime? Was she involved? Yeah, who knows? I didn't know. I mean, again, because of those reasons as well, it was worth meeting with her to see what she had.
And I'm driving there and I'm thinking, okay, so you're meeting somebody, you don't even know if it's Gary Miko. You've never met him before. You don't know if it's really a cop or some nut on the phone who called you. What are you doing? You're doing it anyhow, you know that. And so I have this nice discussion as I'm driving there, and I pull up alongside him, and I have a handbag. And I get in his car, and as I get in, I see the inside of the car is a cop car. He's real. And he immediately, "Can I see your handbag?" I'm thinking, okay, sure. What does he think I have, a gun?
And I'm thinking maybe a weapon. Let's make sure I'm not being tape recorded. Let's just get all this out of the way. So, this person who might be a publicity seeker or some sort of a problem individual, I just want to make sure that, there's some safety zone here where I'm comfortable and she's comfortable.
He hands me this wire, kind of noose-like wire. And I'm saying, it's Michael. This was his. He's used it. He wants to use it on him. He couldn't. Suicidal. It's on the other side of the mountain where he killed her. He's on the opposite side. And as I see it, and I can still picture them, there are two huge drums. Normally, I can't tell you, but I knew 55-gallon drums, big drums.
She said, he can see you. He's up on a hill. She paused. He's groggy. He's out of it. He's overdosed on something. He's almost, delirious or delusional. Or she was just talking about how he was his mindset. He's physically he was tired. He wanted to go home. He can't go home because he knows you're there. He sees police cars come and go, and so he's afraid, but he desperately wants to go home. Sometime on Sunday evening, a decision was made to place a Chester Township police officer in the Manfredonia residence, just in case Michael came home again.
And I grab a piece of paper, back of something, and I make a very rough sketch of where the gallons of drums are in a hill with pools of water.
And she said, "You're going to catch him." And she looked at me and she said, "Real soon." At that exact moment, my police radio, which had been quiet most of the night, on the police radio, you could hear that Chester Township officer on his walkie-talkie say, "All units, he's in the home now." And I said to her, "You have to leave," and sort of opened the door and kind of booted her out of the car and told her I'd be in touch and thank you. And
Gary starts the car shifting, and I jumped out of the car, and he sped away, and that was it.
as I'm racing towards the home, I'm thinking about this encounter and floored by what just happened to me.
Gary arrives on the scene just as Manfredonia is being put in an ambulance. He jumps in, reads Manfredonia his rights, and accompanies him to the hospital. Once again, Nancy Weber's prediction proved to be uncannily accurate. 72 hours after Rachel Domas was first reported missing, Gary Miko and George Duker have brought her killer to justice.
For 11 years, the 11 years that followed Rachel's death, I tried to deny emotionally what I felt about this case. Feelings of being vulnerable, feelings of being a father of daughters, feeling of, again, the same thoughts and questions I had when I sat with Rachel at her crime scene. How could this happen? How could this happen? And could we have prevented it at all? No, it's 20 years later, and it's still close under the surface. It's still there.
Nancy Weber had been right about a lot of things. Her psychic feeling that the killer was somehow connected with the smell of oil was spot on. Manfredonia was a car mechanic. The location where he was found was surrounded by oil drums, just as she had described. She was also correct about his being suicidal. Manfredonia told police that he wanted to take his own life, and he was high on an overdose of cold medicine when arrested. On Monday, September 16, 1985, Michael Manfredonia confessed to murdering Rachel Domas in a blinding, frenzied rage. He's currently serving a life sentence at New Jersey State Prison. A young mother disappears without a trace in Lake Oswego, Oregon. She's had a fight with her husband and walked out. She's missing, and so is the family car. Police suspect the husband. A local psychic's visions reveal there's been a murder. But will a partnership between the psychic and the cop put the killer behind bars? March 31st, 1986. The police in Lake Oswego, a wealthy suburb of Portland, Oregon, get a call from 28-year-old John Burke. He reports that after a late-night argument, his wife, Alexis, left in the family car. She hasn't been seen for 3 days. Local detective Robert Lee is assigned to the case.
At that point in time, we didn't really know for sure that a crime had even been committed. I mean, let's face it, couples split up. I mean, it happens every day. They have arguments. One or the other will take the family car and leave.
But that theory just doesn't fit this situation.
In this case, there was also a 1.5-year-old child that had Down syndrome, and it would be extremely unusual for any mother to leave her child. Alexis was a very beautiful woman. She was a person that would never stay gone for more than a few hours at a time.
Lee and his investigators suspect the husband is being less than truthful about what happened 3 days earlier.
John Burke was lying to me through his teeth. His reactions were real bad. His physiological responses did not match what he was saying. And my impression was that whatever happened to Alexis, John was responsible for it. And I went back and essentially knocked on the man's door to interview him. And I asked him if it was okay if the crime lab could take a look at the apartment. He said yes, and I signaled for the crime lab to come in, and we conducted our interview outside the apartment while the crime lab did their work on the inside.
They found nothing suspicious, so they focus on finding the car that John Burke claims Alexis drove off in.
We reasonably expected that if we found the car, we were going to find Alexis.
Driven by increasing concern and frustrated at the lack of progress in the investigation, Alexis's mother takes an unusual step. A family friend recommends she call psychic Laurie McQuarrie. Over the phone, Laurie immediately gets impressions about a very violent encounter.
The very first sense I got, even without a picture, just hearing Alexis's name, I felt that she was gone. I felt that very strongly. It's like a heaviness right in the middle of my chest. I described Alexis, her personality, which was a bit volatile, very intense. John, I thought, was lazy. I thought he was just a guy who was coasting through life, and he had absolutely no plans on changing anything.
John was essentially unemployable by anybody but his own father, because John's work habits were atrocious, to say the least. He didn't want to show up if he didn't feel like it.
I could see an argument between the husband and the wife.
Laurie's view of the night Alexis disappeared matches with what John had been telling the police, but she sees more than the argument.
What I felt with Alexis and John and the argument that I envisioned was that it was in part about finances, and a lot of people fight about finances. That's usually part of a marital situation. But this was fueled by someone being on drugs, alcohol, and I certainly felt that Alexis hadn't been using it. In fact, one of the points that I made to her mom is I said, this woman turned her life around recently. And she said, yes, that was true. And I said, well, I don't think the husband had. And I thought that he was a very weak person and that he was still using drugs, and that in itself was creating a problem in the marriage. I felt that there had been a horrific fight and that it had happened right there in the house and that she was no longer in that area.
Within 4 days, police get a break. The family car has been abandoned in a rest area. Detective Lee finds it full of clues that just don't add up.
Alexis was 5 feet 1 inch tall and weighed approximately 115 pounds. She would have to be very close to the steering wheel to even reach the pedals. And yet the seat was pushed way to the back, like somebody my size or larger was actually driving the car. The ignition key was still in the ignition, and yet the doors were locked. From a police standpoint, that's what we call a proprietary interest in the car. Somebody might purposely leave the keys in, but he wants to lock the doors because he doesn't want somebody to take his car. There was an open map with a city in Washington that was circled. The fact that the map was there to begin with was disturbing because to us it felt like a setup right off the bat.
Although the car reveals unsettling information, Detective Lee knows he needs hard evidence a crime took place.
We did get a couple of dogs to search the entire rest area to see if there was perhaps a body that was around there, and came up with nothing.
Detective Lee's case has gone cold, so when he gets a call from Alexis's mother saying she's contacted a psychic, he's skeptical but willing to listen.
A police investigator really takes information, sometimes from oddball-type sources, and runs with that information just to see if that information is any good, if it can be corroborated, by another direction. I'm a left-brain thinker. I'm very good with things that I can see and touch, feel, that make reasonable sense to me. So I contacted her by phone. And I have to admit, I probably was a little bit more flippant than I probably should have been.
I can remember that particular day, Detective Lee calling me and telling me that he was the detective working on the case, that he wanted to take me to lunch, and he wanted to check me out. It didn't sit well.
Detective Lee is anxious to hear what Laurie has to say and convinces her to meet him for lunch. Laurie just wants to help find Alexis's body for her family.
She told me an awful lot about my case.
I see numbers.
Laurie tells Detective Lee that she keeps seeing the number 15. He's intrigued. Alexis's car was found 15 miles from her home. Maybe that's the connection.
I watched his body language. He removed his glasses and put them on the table. And I thought, gotcha. You're interested.
Laurie has a flash of information about the car used to transport Alexis's body.
night. There's a larger car, older car, and as I'm almost looking at it, I'm back of it and I'm seeing the trunk lid open, and it's a huge trunk.
Detective Lee can't see the link. Alexis's car is a two-door with a small trunk, not the larger car Laurie's describing.
When you're talking about a car, a big car, spend the next 5 minutes driving the highway and you'll see 100 of them.
Laurie's next bit of info makes Lee even more skeptical.
She told me that the younger brother, Kelly, was involved. I'd interviewed Kelly. Kelly was actually playing ball for the college that he attended in Southern California at the time of the disappearance of Alexis Burke.
I can see the brother handling her body, helping carry it. I can see shovels involved, and I can see this family connection.
We checked with the college. They verified the fact that Kelly was literally over 1,000 miles away at the time. That automatically made 8 or 10 of the other things that Laurie told me couldn't possibly be true simply because his involvement couldn't have been there.
Detective Lee's investigation contradicts many of Laurie's clues, but Laurie is sticking to her guns. If she's right, Lee could be missing some crucial evidence.
I remember telling him, it's going to be different than you think. It will bear me out. Wait and see.
Laurie decides on a dangerous path. She takes the investigation into her own hands and arranges to meet the man she believes to be the killer.
I just had to meet him.
Alexis Burke, a young mother from a suburb of Portland, appears to vanish into thin air. While police suspect her husband, John, they have no evidence a crime has been committed. Alexis's mother contacts psychic Laurie McQuarrie, hoping she'll be able to help police find her daughter. Laurie decides she has no time to waste. Alexis's husband is packing up the apartment, preparing to rent it out, so Laurie takes a risk.
I knew the minute I met him, looked in his eyes, maybe if I was even fortunate enough to shake hands with him, I would get a further impression.
The police found nothing when they searched the apartment. Now it's psychic Laurie's turn.
He answered the door. He was very laid back, and I don't know if he was on drugs or not, but he was just very calm. And of course, I pretended to be a renter. As I went through that apartment, of course, I think not just as a psychic, but I think just as another human being, I thought, where is the wife's picture? Is there nothing here? There was nothing, not a thing of hers there, nothing. And she had only been missing a couple of months, nothing.
Laurie's observations are chilling.
And I thought, how cold. You've already buried her, not only literally, but symbolically. She's gone from your life. When I turned to leave and thanked him, I shook his hands. And when I held his hand, I can just feel these around her neck. I know that's how he murdered her.
My reaction when Laurie told me that she'd gone to the apartment and met John was one of utter disbelief. Here was a person that even she thought was a murderer. And I was convinced of it at that point, and yet she's going up and making contact with him in an apartment. I was very upset.
After going to the apartment, that's when I began to get stronger and stronger feelings about where she was buried.
But I still was a basic skeptic. I believe what I can see, what I can prove.
Still, he's willing to listen. Can the psychic help Detective Lee find the body?
One iota, nothing of her belongings there. Once or twice a week, we would sit and hypothesize with each other about what I think happened here and what he thinks.
One of the things that Laurie had come up with right off the bat was 1-5. She didn't know whether the 1-5 meant Interstate 5, whether it was 1.5 miles, or what the significance of the 15 was. In this case, 15 could very easily have been, we're about 15 miles from the place where we thought the death had occurred.
And there was a place called Bell's Landing.
Bell's Landing, according to Lori, was an important item as far as the relationship between John and Alexis was concerned.
Detective Lee and psychic Lori McQuarrie didn't know if they were looking for an actual place or not. It was like searching for a needle in a haystack.
Maybe this is interesting.
Right down the way over here is where John and Alexis used to spend an awful lot of time. In Oregon, Bell's Landing could either be the side of a mountain where they park machinery when they're clear-cutting an area or doing a logging operation. It could also be a landing alongside of a river. And in this area of Oregon, we have some very, very large rivers, so it's quite plausible that there would be a landing named Bell's somewhere.
That's the frustrating part. Sometimes I get the clues, sometimes I get the symbologies, and it's up to me to make it fit. It's up to me to do the interpretation. And it isn't always like a teletype. I wish it were. We even went out on a couple of searches together in areas out as where she had lived previously, which is not very far from here. So he made the effort. He was at least cooperative and open. You know, it's part of what I saw, but I don't think this is the spot.
So you're not actually getting any...
I'm not getting any vibes, let's put it that way.
Lori told very specifically that the body was buried.
Her head was just inches away from a little creek. I also felt that he had buried her where he could watch her.
That meant an awful lot to us, but what exactly did it mean? Did it mean he could keep an eye on it from work? Was it near his home?
And it was about that time that I was really talking to him about it's in a field, there's a building, but it's not a regular building like you would just walk in and do business in.
The more time they spend together, the more Detective Lee trusts Lori's visions. They match his own hunches about the husband.
She has an insight into people and places and things that I don't even understand.
The scenario will play out. I will see the person, I will see the circumstances. Sometimes the reception may become a little hazy. It isn't always crystal clear. It may come in and out, but it's exactly like watching a television show. I could see him eating his lunch. He goes out there, eats his lunch, and watches the site. The site is within range. He can see it. And as long as it's not disturbed, he knows he's not in trouble.
It looks like John is going to get away with murder, but Lori's psychic instincts tell her he's made a big mistake.
This was something where many people knew what had happened.
Lori is convinced John has told someone about the murder. Detective Lee rethinks the investigation and decides on a new approach.
We used an awful lot of what we would consider to be behavioral analysis on John. We knew that if we applied pressure to John, that his past history would indicate that he would talk to somebody. And yet we didn't want to put so much pressure on him that he was going to invoke his rights per Miranda, which in the United States is a pretty big thing simply because it meant that we were no longer able really to talk directly to John without the interference of an attorney.
I've always thought, you know, sometimes the best crimes in the world have been solved by the girlfriend who was dumped. And I knew that John had had a girlfriend.
Just as Lori predicted, that's exactly what happened.
A former girlfriend of John Burke was living with some girls that were attending college, and she mentioned to one of the girls that she had a former boyfriend who had killed his wife. This girl contacted another girlfriend, who talked to another girlfriend about it, who talked to another girlfriend about it. The sixth girlfriend in line contacted her father. The father of this girl contacted the police department.
Based on the father's tip, police track down John's former girlfriend, Julie, and bring her to Portland. She agrees to cooperate, and they arrange to tape her phone conversations with John.
He said that he'd strangled his wife. Julie got the impression that the body was buried. We were driving by the metal fabrication plant where John and his younger brother worked. And Julie mentioned that John became very different every time that they went by that area.
But John's confession to his old girlfriend isn't enough. Police still need a body to get a conviction. Lori sees Alexis buried somewhere where John can keep a close watch on her. It makes sense it would be close to where he worked. Following his own intuition and Lori's clues, Detective Lee decides to search the 15 acres beside the plant. Maybe this is the clue 15 Lori keeps seeing.
Has a very, very large metal fabrication building with very little in the way of vegetation. The 15 acres that was right next to it was ideal because the trees and the brush provided an awful lot of cover and concealment. Access was pretty much restricted. We sent cadaver dogs over the 15 acres, and their handlers came back with essentially nothing. I was personally disappointed that we were not able to find the body.
As Detective Lee and I would talk throughout the year occasionally about the case, of course, there would be times when he felt that maybe John was going to crack. And I would just always share with him my philosophy. Everything happens when it's supposed to.
It's a real low point in the investigation. Without Alexis's body, police can't charge John with murder. But Lori is sure John's younger brother Kelly is involved, despite the fact he's given police what appears to be an airtight alibi.
I think Kelly just happened to be the wrong guy at the wrong time, and he was related to the murderer. And so he helped dispose of her body.
Kelly was in Southern California during the specific time frame that Alexis disappeared, and a reasonable person would believe that Kelly could not have had any involvement simply because of the time frames. He was literally over 1,000 miles away at the time.
I generally find what I get as a first impression is correct, and I remember telling him I'm standing by it.
It's been a year since Alexis Burke went missing after an argument with her husband, John. With the case going cold and based on her track record, Detective Lee decides to listen to psychic Lori McQuarrie and take another look at the brother's story.
John essentially has no friends of his own. His best friend in the world is his younger brother. If the younger brother knows anything about it, that would automatically mean that his best friend would know all about the case.
Kelly's friends and former roommates are all law students. They've been interviewed once about the disappearance of Alexis. This time, Detective Lee re-interviews them with a grand jury subpoena in his hand, threatening each with jail time if they refuse to cooperate. From what Kelly's friends have to say, it becomes very clear that Kelly knows something. He's brought in for questioning, and Detective Lee persuades him to cooperate.
He told me everything I wanted to know. Yes, he was in Southern California playing ball, but the game had gotten rained out. He was actually back in Oregon 24 hours earlier than he was supposed to be.
It is a turning point for the investigation. If it hadn't been for Lori's conviction, police might never have re-interviewed the brother, and his information was just what they needed to get an arrest.
Bob Lee does not give compliments lightly, but he did kind of offer that up and say, well, I guess you were right. And I just felt that there was a shift at that point.
The deal we made with Kelly was very simple. We were concerned that because the body had been in the ground for so long that we would not be able to formally identify Alexis Burke. The dental records we had were several years old. We knew there were not going to be any fingerprints. There was not going to be anything that was actually going to tell us for certain that this was Alexis Burke and not somebody else. And that would be a loophole that a defense attorney would be able to drive a truck through. So we essentially made a deal with Kelly that we would not prosecute him in any way, shape, or form for his complete assistance in the case, including showing us where the body was.
I felt that there had been a horrific fight.
Kelly confirms Lori's original vision of a strangulation. He tells Detective Lee how a family argument escalated into murder.
Alexis walked out the front door, slammed the door behind her. When she got to the car, she didn't have car keys, and she was in her nightgown. So she came back and started screaming at John.
He had big hands. I can just feel these around her neck. I know that's how he murdered her.
He came over to her and put his hands around her neck. John said to shut her up because she was really making a lot of noise. John says he ripped off the electrical cord and tied it around Alexis's neck just to make sure that she was dead. The body was rolled up in the carpet behind the couch for at least 36 hours. During that time frame, that at least 12 members of his family and her family were in the apartment.
When Kelly finally showed up, he helped John dispose of the body just as Laurie had envisioned.
There's a larger car, older car.
They put the body of Alexis into the back of their father's car, which was a very large Lincoln, dark in color. They then took the body out in the middle of the night and actually dug a hole about 75 yards from the corner of the building where they both worked and buried Alexis.
There's water involved and not a large body of water.
The body was right next to a very, very small rivulet of water. The head was the closest to that water, and it was only several feet away. And of course, the body was under just several inches of dirt.
Laurie's visions are accurate about all the important details of the case. The brothers' involvement, the larger car the body had been moved in, Alexis's body buried in a shallow grave near water, and about John keeping an eye on the site.
He was able to keep an eye on the situation because he went there every single day.
But John Burke still isn't in custody. Because he was out of town, he is oblivious to the discovery of the body.
As it was, John showed up the next day and he was totally in the dark, and by the time he found out about it, it was too late. And I told him he was under arrest for the murder of his wife, and I put on a pair of brand new handcuffs on him. That felt really good.
John Burke is convicted of his wife's murder and sentenced to 13 years in jail. His brother Kelly gets off scot-free because he cooperated with police. With this murder solved, Detective Bob Lee isn't quite as flippant about Laurie's psychic abilities.
I contacted Laurie to tell her, all about the case and how terrifically accurate she was at that point on 28 of the 30 things that she had told me.
I don't know if I feel vindicated so much as I just feel, yes, this stuff does work. And it's important for me to be right, not just for me, but I think it's important for the victim.
Psychic Laurie may be good at predicting the future, but not when it comes to herself. Detective Lee was so impressed with her abilities, he proposed marriage.
I never for a heartbeat thought when I met him that I was going to end up with him.
We've been married now for a little over 18 years. We're a good team.
December 1998, Lindsay Kwai vanishes on Christmas Day. A police missing persons inquiry fails, and a family is torn apart. But a visitor from beyond the grave appears to a psychic in a nightmarish vision.
She told me she'd been carnaged and mangled. She was trying to tell us that she'd been brutally murdered. Then she flashed the railway line. I could see the railway track, and I feel that's where she was telling me this is where she had been killed. And it was for me to go and help her.
Is Lindsay missing, or is she dead? And can a psychic discover the truth behind her disappearance? Southport, northwest England, deserted now, but every summer this seaside town attracts millions of visitors. Most come to breathe in the sea air, stretch out on the miles of empty beaches and enjoy the thrills of the roller coaster. But this man is no tourist. He is psychic Joe Power, and he's been drawn here by a missing girl and a nightmare he will never forget. The story starts here in December 1998. Lindsay Kwai is a 21-year-old wife and mother of 2 small children.
Lindsay was a very kind person, do anything for anybody. Good mother.
The Kwais are just an average family preparing for the holidays, but on Christmas Day 1998, their lives change forever when Lindsay mysteriously vanishes. Days turn into weeks, and weeks turn into months, and still nobody hears from Lindsay. Her family begin to suspect that something is very wrong.
Well, you know, anyone goes missing in your family, it's just undescribable, the feelings you get. Everyone was worrying, and our brains were going, swirling. We weren't sleeping, we weren't eating. It was just a great worry.
In February, Southport police take a statement from Lindsay's distraught husband, Mitchell.
He said that she'd gone out drinking with her friends and that she'd stayed out all night, and he'd been left alone with the 2 children in the house and had woken with them on his own on Christmas Day, and went on to say that Lindsay had arrived later on the Christmas morning, still under the influence of drink, went into a shower, didn't say anything, got a few clothes together, and then left without saying anything to the children. Sometime in the January, he'd seen her in a vehicle with a guy who he didn't know at a junction in Southport somewhere, and he presumed that she'd just started a new life.
Since then, nobody has seen or heard from Lindsay. Police class her as a missing person, and working with her husband Mitchell, start a high-profile nationwide appeal for her return.
We had a press conference, which he attended, and he reiterated the story that he'd given to the police.
She came in the morning, she was out of her face. She came in at 7 o'clock in the morning. She went straight up to bed, and I got the kids up then, opened the presents up. She showed no kind of interest in the kids on Christmas Day. We'd had trouble in our relationship, and we decided to separate before Christmas. But we were going to stay together through Christmas. I thought I was going to leave after New Year, but she's up and left before then.
Lindsay's father, Peter Wilson, makes an appeal to his daughter.
I just say, you know, if Lindsay's watching this, no one's blaming her for what she's done, you know, leaving the children. And we'd like to contact the police as soon as possible.
Psychic Joe Power has been following the case in the press, but late one night in February, he has a nightmare that he thinks is a message from the spirit world.
I'd gone to sleep. It was like any ordinary night. During my sleep, I heard a phone ring and 2 people appeared to me.
Joe recognizes the woman from the newspapers as housewife Lindsay Kwai, but police think she is a missing person. Joe claims that the spirit of Lindsay is trying to tell him she's been murdered, who her killer is, and where to find her body.
Lindsay Kwai told me she had been carnaged and mangled.
Joe's vision is incredibly violent and shocks him to this day.
And then she told me for the police to search the railway, and also as well, the police must search the fairgrounds.
But why did Lindsay want these 2 areas searched? As the images intensify, Joe receives more information.
I heard McDowell's, and I actually seen McDowell's, so I was hearing it and I was seeing it. And I also heard her say tractors.
Joe is confused and distressed by his vision. He turns to friend, retired police support worker Frida Valentine for advice.
He started telling me that he'd been visited by Lindsay Kwai in a dream, and she said, "Please help me. I am desperate for somebody to recognize that I have been murdered. I am not a missing person."
Frida is shocked by what Joe tells her.
I think he really believed that she had been cut up. With him saying about the mangled carnage, it more or less looked as though they couldn't see or recognize any parts of the body.
Joe also tells Frida where he thinks Lindsay might be buried.
He told me that he'd been shown the railway track and also the fairground in Southport. I suggested to Joe that he go to the police and give all this information.
Reluctantly, Joe follows Frida's advice.
I was absolutely terrified going into a police station. I thought they would think I was the murderer, going in with so much detailed and accurate information.
But no detectives from the Missing Persons Inquiry Team is available, so Joe gives a full statement to another officer.
And she reassured me that that information would be passed on to the officers in charge.
If information comes in from a psychic or a medium that we feel can be corroborated or will send us in a certain direction, then my view is that we will always utilise that if it helps us. But the problem with that is that quite often it's not supported by any tangible evidence.
Joe never hears back from the police regarding his statement. As far as they're concerned, this is still a missing persons case.
Well, it was very frustrating to me because at that time I knew this was a murder case and not a missing persons.
Joe is determined to discover more about Lindsay Kwai's mysterious disappearance. Has she been killed? Was she buried in the fairground or the railway? And could Joe convince the police Lindsay is not a missing person and a killer is walking free? A young mother, Lindsay Kwai, has gone missing. Police have no clue to her whereabouts. Her husband has appealed for her safe return, but in a terrifying vision, psychic Joe Power sees a woman being killed and dismembered. Is this Lindsay? Should police be hunting a murderer? Joe is determined to find out.
I felt I had to investigate this case myself because the police were not listening, and I felt I had a sense of duty to get this young lady's remains found.
Joe drives to Southport. He has no map and he doesn't know the area. All he has is his confusing list of locations from Lindsay. The railway, the fairground, McDowell's, and a tractor yard. After hours in the car, Joe is tired and lost. He's convinced his psychic connection to Lindsay has failed until he reaches a certain road completely by chance.
It was just around this part here that I heard a voice crystal clear, and a sudden noise shouted, "Stop!"
And I turned to the right, pulled up the car, and for no apparent reason at all is that the car horn started to go off. I got out of the car, pulled the bonnet, eventually it went off.
And I got back in the car and I decided, with the car horn going off, that I'd get away from the area because of the neighbours and the sound, and I felt really quite frightened at that stage.
And I drove around on the next street. But just before I'd actually got to the bottom of the road, there was a place called McDowell's that was on the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side was another place full of tractors.
That's when it all sunk into me that this is where she had actually sent me.
Both the tractor yard and McDowell's are on Stamford Road, the very road where Lindsay lived with husband Mitchell and her 2 children. Joe is now convinced that the woman who appeared to him was Lindsay Kwai. But why is she drawing him here?
After I left the area, I felt shocked, I felt disturbed, but I also felt, it's strange to say this, is reassurance in the images that I had actually received.
Once again, Joe decides to contact the police. This time, he writes a letter to the head of the missing person investigation, Bob Marsden.
I wrote to Bob Marsden and told him that I was no ordinary person. I was doing this because this young lady had appeared to me, and this case needs to be looked at in more detail.
Joe receives this receipt for his letter, but the police do not call.
I believe Joe was getting very, very frustrated because he'd informed all the police, and yet they still believed that she was actually missing.
Sometime after Joe's letter arrived at Southport Police Headquarters, a review of the missing persons inquiry is ordered. Detective Superintendent Jeff Sloan is brought in to re-examine all the evidence. Immediately, his instincts as a police officer tell him something is not right.
There was a lot of circumstantial evidence which tended towards the fact that Lindsay was not alive. We couldn't establish any proof of life.
Lindsay hasn't used her bank account since before Christmas. She hasn't applied for income support or housing benefit. Vital medical appointments have been missed, and she has had no contact with her family, not the actions of either a runaway or a loving mother.
When I read through the documents and I read through the lifestyle and some of the issues that emanated from that missing from home inquiry, I formed the opinion quite quickly that this actually should be a murder inquiry. I felt that Lindsay had been murdered.
Joe Power is no longer alone in his belief that Lindsay has been killed.
It's very frustrating, you know, knowing that this young lady had been cornered to the mangles and you have to sit there and wait for her to be found.
Detective Superintendent Jeff Sloan is placed in charge of the new murder inquiry, but this isn't going to be an easy case to crack.
It's very frustrating not to have a body because when you have a body, that's where your lines of inquiry start to develop. All we had was 22 Stamford Road, which was Lindsay's home address, where she'd lived with Mitchell. Well, the very first thing that we do is to go back and fully search the house again, the gardens and the area immediately surrounding the house.
Using the house as their starting point, the police begin one of the largest searches ever conducted in mainland England.
And we actually used officers from the Royal Air Force, the JARIC, which is a reconnaissance organisation, who flew over and could detect any recently disturbed ground. And if they highlighted any areas, then we would send a specialist search team to go and excavate.
It's an agonizing time for Lindsay's family.
We're by the phone 24/7, and sometimes we get false information where bones had been found at one time. And we were given the information, then we found out it was a pig, a dead pig. And then when you heard about a body being found and this, that and the other, one was found in the River Ribble, I think, you wondered if that was Lindsay. It's never ending.
But the police failed to find any evidence of Lindsay.
I was concerned that we hadn't found a body, and I was at a loss as to where we would look to next, and took the decision that we wouldn't undertake any more searches or digging until it was based on intelligence that we had through. But it was frustrating for me.
The police are forced to suspend all searches, but Lindsay's parents refuse to give up hope. They spend every waking moment looking for their daughter.
Well, we searched in the canals, rivers, we got stung by bees, hornets, you name it. But, you know, I used to be up to my neck sometimes in freezing cold water. But we couldn't stop. It was just our way of contributing towards finding Lindsay.
With the police search on hold and no new information coming forward, it looks as if Lindsay's body may never be found and the case remain unsolved. But Psychic Joe Power believes this is something the spirit world would never allow. Joe thinks Lindsay's spirit is unable to rest, as once again she appears to him with a message from beyond the grave.
The second time Lindsay appeared to me was at my home address, and she came to me and told me that the police were not listening to the information that I had previously provided to them.
Joe's first vision led him to Lindsay's house. Now he returns to Southport to search the fairground and railway track. He has a feeling that these areas are in some way connected to her disappearance. He starts at the railway track. Joe doesn't know what he should be looking for. He's hoping his psychic powers will be his guide.
When I walked along this particular part of the railway line, my hair stood up on my hand and I heard a voice. I believe that was Lindsay telling me is that she was in this location.
But if Lindsay is buried at the railway, why does Joe want the police to search the fairground as well?
It was quite clear to me is that this young lady's remains were in two separate locations.
But Joe Power fails to find any evidence that Lindsay is in this location. For Detective Superintendent Sloan, the case is equally baffling, with no new leads coming in. He decides to re-examine the original witness testimonies. He wants to build a picture of Lindsay's last known movements.
We believe Lindsay had been shopping on the 15th of December and had actually made a call to the benefits agency, and she made an inquiry about a missing cheque, which should have been issued in the November. As a result of that conversation, she was sent out a disclaimer form, which was never ever received and never ever recovered by the police. It was after that phone call, basically, that Lindsay ceased to exist.
Detective Superintendent Sloan discovers that the only person who claims to have seen Lindsay alive after December 16th was her husband, Mitchell Quay. He told police she left him and abandoned her children on Christmas Day. Detective Superintendent Sloan is suspicious. He has a feeling Mitchell's statement doesn't ring true. It doesn't fit with the profile he has built of Lindsay.
Given the background of Lindsay, what her upbringing was, the way she was interacted with her children, that there was no way she would have walked out on her children on Christmas Eve and Christmas Day.
Police take a closer look at Lindsay and Mitchell's relationship.
Mitchell was very violent towards Lindsay over a number of years, and ultimately she did try to institute divorce proceedings from him. But the issue was then that she'd always accepted Mitchell back and they'd always be reconciled.
Could Mitchell really be her killer? Was this why Lindsay's spirit led Joe to her road? Was she trying to tell him that this was the murder scene? It's been 9 months since Lindsay Quay disappeared in Southport, northwest England. Detective Superintendent Jeff Sloan believes that Lindsay has been murdered, just as psychic Joe Powers said over 7 months earlier. Joe's nightmarish vision had started a psychic investigation that took him to Southport Fairground, the railway track, and Lindsay's own home. But what significance did these locations have? All is to be revealed as police close in on their prime suspect, Lindsay's husband, Mitchell Quay.
Well, Mitchell portrayed an image of he was the abandoned father, the abandoned husband, and that, sadly for us, he was very plausible in front of the media. He was very confident, overconfident sometimes. He seemed to be reaching out to the community, and a lot of people seemed to be believing him and formed the opinion that perhaps the police were just picking him out because he seemed the obvious candidate for a suspect.
In June 2000, Detective Superintendent Jeff Sloan trusts his instincts and arrests Mitchell Quay on suspicion of murdering his 21-year-old wife, Lindsay.
Well, Mitchell was an egotist, and I actually felt that he formed the opinion that he could get away with this because of the time element and the fact that the media had shown such an interest in him, and various members of the community were sympathetic to him.
But despite hours of questioning, Mitchell refuses to crack. Detective Superintendent Sloan is convinced that he has his man, but he doesn't have enough evidence to press charges. It looks like Mitchell is about to walk.
Basically stuck to his story, but when we listened to the interviews, his responses and his replies, I got from the psychologist that we were starting really to get to him and he was becoming quite low and down in this. And I think the telling point came when I gave instructions within his hearing that his father was to be charged and so was his brother.
Phone records show that at key points in the investigation, Mitchell made an unusually large number of calls to his brother Elliot and his father. This was totally out of character, and Detective Superintendent Sloan thought it pointed to their involvement.
The arrest of Elliot and the subsequent arrest of Mitchell's father had quite a pronounced impact on Mitchell because I think he felt that he'd actually succeeded in convincing members of the public, the press, and to a certain degree the police, that he was right and that Lindsay had just disappeared. He thought it would go away. And I got the impression that when he realised that we did mean business and that they too had been arrested, that reality started to creep in, and the realisation was that he wasn't going to get away with it. I made the decision that I was going to charge Mitchell with murder, and within a very, very short space of time, I was contacted on my mobile to tell me that Mitchell had actually admitted that he had in fact killed Lindsay.
Over a year after Lindsay Quay first went missing, the truth surrounding her disappearance is finally uncovered.
The last few hours of Lindsay's life all centred around the cheque that had gone missing in November. Mitchell, at some stage, tried to encash that cheque. There's a row developed over that, and he's lost his control and he strangled her.
As Mitchell's confession continues, the true horrific nature of the crime is revealed.
And that's when he recruited Elliot to come in and to help him to dispose of the body. And that's when he decided that he and Elliot would cut the body up in the bath with the children asleep in bed in the next room, which I thought was horrific.
The images of violence in Joe's dream were now explained. Lindsay was dismembered, just as Joe had said. And the scene of the crime? Lindsay's house on Stamford Road, the very place Joe had been led to 12 months earlier. How did he know these facts?
I knew 100% I'd been right all the time. It was a very emotional case and a very upsetting case.
Mitchell Quay leads police officers to the locations where he buried his wife's remains.
Lindsay's torso was found near to the Pleasureland theme park at Southport, behind a go-kart racing track where Mitchell used to work. We found Lindsay's legs on the railway embankment, which was near to one of the first places they resided together.
Joe had asked for these locations to be searched over 12 months earlier.
I knew straight away. It didn't come as a surprise for me. What you've got to remember is how powerful these images, what she had shown to me. She'd already shown me the fairground. She'd shown me the railway.
But unfortunately for Joe, at that time he was working alone. He never did receive the call to help the police. But Joe believes there is one person who recognizes the part he played in this case.
Lindsay briefly appeared to me after her remains were actually found, and I heard her say thank you, and there was no more contact from this young lady.
On January 16, 2001, Mitchell Quay is sentenced.
Mitchell was sentenced to a mandatory life term of imprisonment with a tariff of 18 years because of the severity of the way it disposed of his wife, Lindsay.
Elliot Quay receives 7 years for his part in the gruesome murder. Mitchell's father is released without charge.
This case was extremely difficult to crack, not least because of the way that she was murdered, the way she was disposed of, and the way that he behaved after the murder, actually actively seeking the press and seeking public opinion on his side and sympathy.
Detective Superintendent Sloan receives a special commendation for the integral part he played in the capture and conviction of this most devious of killers. Joe Power's personal investigation is as yet unrecognized.
When the killers were caught, I was very satisfied that I'd done my job. All the detail and all the information that had been provided made me feel very, very satisfied, not only just for me, but for Lindsay Quay's parents as well. It was a very emotional case and a very upsetting case.
To lose Lindsay that way has affected everybody, the whole family, me included. Never going to be the same again. Still suffering now. We'll be suffering until the day we die. Peter, my eldest son, hung himself in the loft at my house. Could never get over the fact of what they did to Lindsay after they'd murdered her. That's what led to his suicide.
2 years after her vicious murder, Lindsay is finally able to rest in peace. But she leaves behind a family torn apart by tragedy.
Mitchell's taken my daughter. He's taken Robin and Jack's mother. He's taken my son, Peter, because I blame him for that as well. He's taken a lot off the family, which we'll never forgive him for.
A loved husband and father goes missing. His wife is frantic to find him.
I gotta get to him. We gotta find him.
A psychic finds herself as a go-between, relaying clues she believes come from the man who's gone missing.
It's Pickle, it's Pickle.
Will this clue help police solve the mysterious disappearance?
I could see the sincerity in her face. She believed what she was telling me.
He wants to be found.
March 1st, 1997, in the small town of Sharpsville, Pennsylvania, local chef Daryl Cozart headed out on Saturday night after work. He hasn't returned home to his wife Jeanette and their 2 small children. She knows something's not right.
He told me he was going to go to see some friends at a bar, which was very unusual for him. Daryl didn't usually go hang out with friends. He was a really family man.
On Sunday, when Daryl still hasn't returned home, Jeanette Cozart reports him missing to the police. To them, it's just a missing person case.
It's not uncommon for a spouse to report somebody missing who maybe run off with some friends to get away for a few days.
I knew something had to have happened to him for him not to contact me and not to let us know he's okay.
Usually within 48 hours, the person appears back at home and maybe has to eat a little crow or has some patching up to do at home, but they always come back.
They pretty much just told me, don't worry. He's probably just on a drinking binge. And I'm like, no, this is not my husband. He didn't do those kind of things. He went to work, he came home. This is not what he did.
Police weren't aware of any problems at home or what would make him run off.
They told me that it would be 72 hours, of course, before they could list him as a missing persons. And that's when we kind of took matters into our own hands and started making flyers up because we were frustrated. I just thought, well, maybe he's hurt. I gotta get to him, we gotta find him.
Jeanette's mother drops off some missing person flyers at the newsstand owned by psychic Mary Ellen Rodriguez. Her son-in-law, Daryl Cozart's been missing now for 2 days.
She handed me the missing persons paper. When I touched it, it seemed like the energy of Daryl, all of a sudden, it opened something up, and there was Daryl standing next to her. Here was Mary on this side of me, and here was Daryl on this side of me, and I'm watching 2 worlds going on at the same time. Here's Daryl on the other side with his hands pressed against like a wall saying, just show me where the door is, just show me where the door is. And just show me where the doorway is so I can come back. I need to come back. I said, Mary, he's dead. He's dead. He's standing right next to you. And she turned and looked and still wasn't aware of him there like I was. I saw him as if I could touch him, and I saw her knowing I could touch her.
Jeanette's mother tells her daughter of the bizarre encounter she had that morning. Jeanette goes to the newsstand. She hopes this total stranger, Mary Ellen, will be able to help her find Daryl.
I walked in, and Mary Ellen walked up to me, and she put her arms around me and just held me.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry, Jeanette.
She just kept repeating, I'm so sorry. I'm so, so sorry.
I am so sorry.
She told me that that wasn't her, and it was Daryl telling me he was sorry. He was just so, so sorry.
Mary Ellen explains to Jeanette it is Daryl speaking and acting through her.
I said, he's standing there next to you. He's so sorry. I said, he's trying to find his way back. I said, but he can't come back.
She had told me that he was shot, that we would find him, and he would have a rope around his neck.
So sorry.
Mary Ellen says she became a conduit between 2 worlds, with Daryl pushing her to relay messages to Jeanette.
Daryl kept saying to me, ghost, tell her ghost. I just said to her, does ghost mean anything to you? And she reared back and put her hand up and said, yes, that was our favorite movie.
The moment she said it, I had chills from my head down to my toes. And at that moment, I knew it was him, and that this was the real thing, and that no matter how much I wanted him to be here on earth with us, he was no longer.
Later the same day, Mary Ellen gets another visitor, Detective Jerry Smith.
Hi, Gary. How are you tonight?
He's a policeman in the town just next to Sharpsville, the town where Daryl Cozart lived.
When Jerry came in, I said to him, you know that guy that's missing, he's dead.
First I looked at her like, you know, you're nuts, you know. She says, no, I have this vision, and I see things, and and he's laying out in a field or a swamp. It's real marshy, she said, and I could see he has something around his neck, like a rope or a chain, and that he's shot. And I didn't know what to make of it.
And he said, how do I know he's dead? I said, well, he's standing right next to you.
I thought at first she was joking. And then I could see the sincerity in her face that she wasn't joking. She believed what she was telling me. And it's bizarre, and it makes it difficult because you can't use apparitions or visions as testimony in any court of law as the laws as we know it. So to vow or to affirm that something is true based on a vision, the courts will not recognize it. So basically it becomes at that point just a piece of information to guide the investigator, more of a tool than anything.
Detective Smith decides he has to pass on the information because of Mary Ellen's credibility.
It's not like some transient that just comes walking in off the street and says, hey, I had a vision. This is a business person who has a good reputation in the community and has had that business there for years.
Detective Smith meets with the Sharpsville Police, the neighboring police force with jurisdiction over the case.
I remember saying to him, I don't think I'm crazy. I'm not drinking. I'm not smoking anything, but Mary claims she had a vision, and the person you're looking for is deceased, and he was murdered. I remember the officer kind of looked at me like, yeah, you're right, I do think you're crazy. But he took the information down.
Skeptical, the Sharpsville Police check out Detective Smith's information. An officer visits Mary Ellen, who says Daryl is telling her what to say.
Well, yes, I said he's dead. And that seemed to be what I kept saying over and over. Daryl wanted him to know where he had been shot, and I told him I was feeling everything that he was feeling. And I felt the bullet.
Despite Mary Ellen's clues, police are still not convinced this is anything more than a husband who's run off.
He was such a great father. He loved his kids so much. Playing football with his son and helping his daughter learn how to ride her bike.
It seemed as if nobody wanted to do anything about finding this young man.
It was a very frustrating time because I wanted answers so desperately.
Mary Ellen felt Daryl was begging her not to give up.
Please tell them that I'm dead. Please tell them they need to be looking for me.
A father of two just disappears one night in a small Pennsylvania town. Daryl Cozart's family feels something is wrong and start searching for him. From the moment psychic Mary Ellen Rodriguez first hears about the case, she says she's had Daryl as a constant companion.
Every morning when I crossed the bridge into Pennsylvania, he would tip my mirror down, and his eyes would be looking back at me in the mirror. And I would say, "Good morning, Daryl." And that would begin our day.
Mary Ellen believes he's trying to tell her what happened, but she can't always make sense of the clues.
He's screaming it in my ear. It's fickle, it's fickle.
She kept pacing back and forth and just, what do you mean fickle? What's so fickle? Who's being fickle?
Daryl has now been missing for more than 72 hours. The police decide to investigate his disappearance and question people who work with him to see if they can get a lead.
There were really no signs that there was any foul play because everybody they spoke to liked Daryl, and he was a likable person, and there was really no suspects as far as he didn't have any enemies.
They do find one person who may have some information about that night.
They had interviewed co-workers of his, and one woman was focused in on as being one of the last people to see Daryl.
But police have no reason to suspect her. Jeanette Cozart knows Daryl's co-worker, but only by her first name, Cindy or Cynthia.
When I walked into the restaurant where he had worked, Cindy was there. She asked me what I was doing there, and I says, "I'm looking for Daryl. Have you seen Daryl?" "Well, no, I saw him last night. He worked here last night, and he took me home, but that's the last time I saw him." I'm like, okay. And then she hugged me and told me that she was sure everything was going to be all right. He'll turn up.
That's not what Mary Ellen is telling Jeanette. She believes Daryl's been shot, but she can also feel that he's been hung. It's like she is experiencing what happened to Daryl.
I felt like I was choking, and I wanted to pull this away from my throat, so I felt that there was a rope around my neck. My forehead would itch. I start scratching my forehead, and I feel like I'm adjusting a bandana on my forehead. So I began to realize that at the moment that he was murdered, he was actually wearing a bandana.
It wasn't just an itchy forehead. Mary Ellen says Daryl tried to get her attention in other ways.
He would start banging on my walls. My walls would start banging, and my phone would start ringing. Again, trying to get my attention to do something. Come on, you got to do something. You have to do something. You have to call them, tell them, and I did.
Driven by Daryl's desperation to be found and her desire to help Jeanette, Mary Ellen goes out searching for clues night after night.
I truly went looking for the body because nobody believed me. And Jeanette was, her life was in too much turmoil with news media and trying to keep her children calm. I felt like a search party of one. In my off time, I would go out looking for him, hoping that he would take me to where his body was. I feel his excitement when I'm really close to where he may be. He gets excited, like, this is it, and he'll say, this is it, here, here, here.
Mary Ellen feels Daryl keeps bringing her back to one street.
That's where his body was. I felt that that's where it had happened. Right there in that area. Daryl acknowledged that it was right around in here, he said to me, it was right around in here. This is where they killed me. This is where they murdered me. He was very frustrated at the lack of enthusiasm that the police department had for finding him. I didn't know how else to help him except to go out looking for him.
She was determined, and I think Daryl was pushing her.
Finally, after days of searching, Mary Ellen gets a signal she believes is from Daryl.
I was out looking for a sign of where Daryl may be. I was talking with Daryl, and I said to Daryl, please help me to help you. Show me where you may be, or even in the area, show me. When I found the sneaker, it was pointed west towards the airport, and so that may have been a sign that he's either in this area or he's down that way, down west to the airport.
Mary Ellen was worried no one would believe her, so she doesn't tell police about the shoe, but she feels it may have been a sign after all. A week after his disappearance, police find Daryl Cozart's van near the airport. Inside the van, police discover evidence of Daryl's murder.
The van had blood. You went on the side doors, there was blood on the carpet.
There's only a couple ways you can get blood in there. And unfortunately, one is the person's deceased.
Mary Ellen has been telling the police Daryl's dead from the beginning.
So that became a validation for me. For Daryl, that was a sigh of relief that, see, now they know I'm dead.
It's now a murder investigation, and police are under pressure to find Daryl's body.
We didn't know exactly where he was killed or by who.
The last thing you want is the public to feel unsafe, like there's a killer on the loose somewhere, and am I next?
But to find the killer, the police need more evidence. Mary Ellen feels Daryl is trying to help by telling her where to find his body.
They showed me a picture. There was a calendar up on my wall. It was a bog area with high grass and the little fence. That's where his body was.
Mary Ellen knows Daryl is desperate to be found and feels him getting more and more agitated. She is shocked by what she says happened next.
I'm driving to church, and he grabs my steering wheel. He says, I want to go to the police department. I want them to know I want to be buried in a gray pinstripe suit. Finally, I had to strike a deal with him. And I said, okay, Daryl, I tell you what. I said, you let me go to church, and then afterwards I will drive to the police department and we'll talk. And he conceded and he let go of the steering wheel.
So after church, Mary Ellen pays a visit to the Sharpsville police to ask why they're not checking nearby bogs, like the picture she showed them on her calendar.
And I said, you've got a picture of where he's located. Can't you find that area? Can't you just search? Can't you go out and look? I know he's face up, and my forehead is still itchy, so he's still wearing the bandana.
The officer isn't convinced there's any merit to what she's saying.
He said, I don't have the manpower to do that, and that could be any place. Daryl was answering all the questions. And at that point, the police officer said to me, will you tell him that if he wants to wear that suit, we better find him soon.
Mary Ellen relays messages back and forth, and finally, one last bit of information from Daryl for the Sharpsville police.
And he said, tell him before Tuesday. Before Tuesday morning, they will find me.
Daryl Cozart has been missing now for over a week, and psychic Mary Ellen Rodriguez is convinced the police are on the verge of finding his body. Monday afternoon, all of Mary Ellen's predictions come true.
I could feel his excitement. My hands were trembling, I was shaking. He was very excited about they had found him.
Another break for the police. A passing truck driver on Highway 11 near the Pennsylvania-Ohio border spots a body wrapped in plastic, dumped by the road. Daryl is found by a bog, exactly as Mary Ellen had predicted.
A truck driver happened to come along down a road near a swamp and had spotted what he thought was a body laying out in this grassy area, called police, and police arrived and ended up being Daryl.
One of the most horrific things I've had to go through in my life. Losing Daryl this way, having him murdered, was hard. But telling our children was the hardest thing I have ever done.
It was 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock when they found his body, and he was really excited, and my phone rang, and I said, I know, you found him, didn't you? I already knew. And they did find him face up, and he was wearing a bandana.
He was found shot and had a rope around his neck. Almost exactly the way she said he would be.
Now do you believe me? And Daryl was saying the same thing. Now do you believe me?
There was things that she described that would make you believe or make you suspicious that she may have been there, because there was things that were not released to the press that were found at the crime scene that she described. Call it coincidence, call it phenomena. It's unexplained.
The evidence confirms what Mary Ellen has been telling the police. The rope didn't kill Daryl. He'd been shot 5 times at close range with a .44 caliber gun.
That Daryl died a very violent death.
I saw the whole thing. He showed it to me. He didn't know he was going to be killed. He didn't know that he was being set up to be murdered.
The discovery of Daryl's body leads to the police getting a tip. It's from a man who has information about someone who knew Daryl.
Originally, he wasn't suspicious. He just said that he asked them to move the furniture, and they went into the garage, and there was a van in there, and there was a large tarp rolled up sort of like a carpet. And he said when he asked them to move this, he can feel legs. And then that's when he says, is this an individual?
Shockingly, the answer is yes, and the friend knows this person is dead. But he doesn't tell police until after the discovery of Daryl's body.
Just because of friendship, he just let it go. And then when it became public as to who the individual was, and he decided that he would go ahead and tell us basically what he did.
Mary Ellen has one unsolved clue, and it's about to make sense.
It's fickle, it's fickle, it's fickle.
It turns out the name of the suspected killer is Frank Fickle. The tip is from a friend of his. A few days earlier, he'd helped Fickle move a body.
Kind of threw me for a loop, because this is one of the things Mary Ellen had told me that Daryl kept saying to her was Fickle. He keeps repeating Fickle, she would say, and I'm like, well, what's Fickle, you know? And you never think of it as a person's last name.
With a search warrant in hand, police comb the Fickle home looking for evidence.
And he'll say, this is it, here, here, here.
It's the same street Mary Ellen Rodriguez has been driving past looking for clues.
And it was quite apparent that he was shot in that basement.
The killer had tried to destroy evidence.
A couple walls you can see had just been painted. You can see the floor has been washed down, and you can see that they were using bleach, things such as that, and some of the material was still there, so you can tell it was just fresh.
But the killer hadn't been able to get rid of all of the evidence.
Searching the basement, I could see different fibers still clinging to the cobwebs. Then as I kept on examining the area, I can see, even though there's minute, you can see buds spatter in different locations on the furnace pipes. And in one place I seen up in the rafters, there was a fairly good sized piece of scalp too.
At the moment that he was murdered, he was actually wearing a bandana.
Mary Ellen was right. Daryl had been wearing a blue bandana when he was shot.
We found a bandana up in the upstairs or on the first level floor that had the bullet hole in. And it had one bullet hole in the same area of where he was shot.
Police interview Frank Fickle's estranged wife. It turns out police have already talked to her. She's Cynthia, who worked with Daryl and was one of the last to have seen him alive. She said Daryl arrived at the Fickle home around midnight. She invited him in and sent him to the basement to smoke. But she told police she had no idea Frank Fickle was waiting there to kill Daryl.
Fickle was a person who was very jealous and had made himself believe that his wife had been having an affair with Daryl.
He was supposed to go down a cellar to smoke some grass. And when he got down, the shooting took place in the basement.
Frank Fickle had used his body as target practice.
Frank Fickle is arrested on Wednesday, March 12, 1997, for murdering Daryl Cozart in a jealous rage.
I don't even know how to explain how you feel inside when you look face to face at the man that murdered your husband. And anger, frustration, just emptiness.
The arrest is just a week and a half after Daryl went missing. Frank Fickle is found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life imprisonment.
Daryl didn't deserve to die. He deserved to be here to raise his children and to love his children. God put him here for a reason, and Frank had no right to take him out of God's picture. No right.
Mary Ellen's involvement maybe led investigators to dig a little deeper, to talk to a few more people, because early in the investigation it was just a missing person. And generally a missing person investigation doesn't entail bringing in detectives. Well, if Mary Ellen would approach me again with any information on a crime we were investigating, I certainly would talk with her, and I certainly would take the information and give a little more weight than I would have the first time.
I would not have been able to take that journey without Mary Ellen. Without her, I would have been extremely lost. And we may never have found out who did it.
And Daryl finally did get to wear his gray-striped suit at his funeral. For that, Mary Ellen is grateful.
My life changed forever when I became divided between two worlds, the earth world and the spirit world.
Birmingham, England, January 2002. A young man vanishes. Police think he's a runaway, but a psychic has a vision of a brutal murder.
His head was pushed down and he had a blow to the head. He's describing this as if he's watching himself. He's also shown me that he's been buried underwater.
Can she convince the cops a killer is on the loose and put him behind bars? Or will the mystery surrounding this young man's disappearance remain unsolved forever?
It was really horrific. It was frightening.
Birmingham, a bustling city in the heart of England and a centre of business and finance. But like any major city, Birmingham has its problems. Over 23,000 violent crimes were committed last year. Detective Daly is a cop whose job it is to catch the culprits. But when good old police methods fail to find missing local man Mark Green, it's to this woman, Diane Lazarus, that she turns. Diane Lazarus is a psychic, and today she's in Birmingham to help Detective Daly solve the riddle of Mark's disappearance. The story starts here in January 2002. 31-year-old Mark Green is out with a friend in the city centre. When he doesn't return home, his parents begin to worry.
They called the police quite soon after the concerns became quite concrete, and they reported Mark as a missing person.
Detective Marcella Daly is placed in charge of the missing person inquiry.
Mark was a 31-year-old man that came from the Stetchard area of Birmingham. He was a lecturer at a local college in art and design. He had a great bunch of friends, two very loving parents and a very good supportive family setup.
Mark's disappearance sends shockwaves through Birmingham's gay community. No one can understand why he would go missing or where he would go. Detective Daly's first task is to interview Mark's friend.
Mark's friend wasn't treated as a suspect as such, however, he was a vital person within this missing person investigation, and he held vital information, and he was incredibly supportive towards the investigation.
He tells officers what happened on the night in question.
The night that Mark disappeared, he went out with some friends, decided that he was going to go on to another club, and his friend took the bus home. Mark was last seen alive on the 17th of January, outside, actually leaving the nightclub called Kudos in Birmingham city centre. He was seen leaving through the main doors, and then he was later seen just outside by CCTV.
There are tens of thousands of closed-circuit television or CCTV cameras in Birmingham, but unfortunately Mark is only seen by one. Police make appeals on local radio for information about Mark's disappearance.
You're listening to Birmingham City News. It's Monday, the 28th of January. West Midlands Police are launching an appeal for information relating to the disappearance of 31-year-old college lecturer Mark Green. Mark was last seen in the city centre on Thursday evening. There is concern for his safety and police...
But no new information comes forward. In desperation, Detective Daly hits the streets and begins interviewing hundreds of potential witnesses.
Hi. Can I just let you have a look at that, please? It's a missing person inquiry. This is a missing person inquiry. This is a missing person inquiry. Missing person inquiry. Have you seen this person at all?
No, I haven't.
Have you seen this person at all?
Not at all.
Can I just give you that? Okay, thank you. There was obviously contact with a range of friends, and also friends that perhaps he had lost contact with. There was also contact with other areas that he'd been to in his life, whether it be university or friends that he'd visited. There was nobody that came to light that would have any need or intention to hurt Mark in any way.
The police are baffled by the case. It seems Mark just disappeared into thin air. For Mark's parents, waiting for news of their son is heartbreaking.
Anne and Don Green, throughout this investigation, were incredibly brave and have my utmost respect. It's very difficult to actually wake up every day knowing that your son's His son's not there, and nobody can find him, and nobody can explain whilst he's not there.
It's now been 2 months since Mark went missing. Over 150 miles away in Wales, psychic Diane Lazarus is holding a private séance for a woman called Myron Green. She wants to contact her daughter who died the previous year.
The reading is taped for you, just in case his message is passed on for other people. I'll not only talk about you, I'll talk about your family members as well.
Diane's séances are incredibly detailed. To help her clients remember what is said, she records everything to tape.
I've got a young lady coming through called Sian, and I feel that she passed over in an accident. She's saying that she loves you. She's now bringing in a gentleman called Mark. She's putting her arm right around him and bringing him forward. And she's saying that he's definitely passed over.
Diane thinks that the man is Mark Green. She didn't know that Mark is Myron's nephew or that the police think he's a missing person. Was he in fact dead?
I hadn't heard anything about Mark Green at all, in all honesty. You know, the first I heard of Mark was literally through doing that reading. Yes, this is definitely a gentleman called Mark.
But that's my nephew, and he's only missing. He's not dead.
I remember Myra was literally shaking her head saying, no, you can't have him. So I went in to describe Mark. He's got brown hair. He's got a lovely smile. He's saying he likes art. He's also shown me steps towards a college, so I feel he worked in a college. He showed me he used to carry a rucksack. He was always in a rush.
Well, that's my nephew. He's a lecturer, but he's not dead.
He's definitely passed over in the spirit world. He's quite distressed because he's saying that
Diane's description is so accurate, Myron has no choice but to believe. She's very upset, but worse is to come.
Mark is telling me that he's not missing. He has not walked away from his parents. He's quite distressed because he's saying that he's been murdered. I don't think for 1 minute that she expected this to happen, simply because she thought she was coming for a reading, she might have a message from her daughter, but she was really taken back by the fact that I had Mark in front of me.
Diane describes what she believes happened to Mark on the night he disappeared.
He's saying that he went to a nightclub, and as he walked from there, he was attacked. He's saying that he had this nasty blow, something really heavy hit him at the back of his head. He's saying that he's buried underwater. And then went on to say that it was a lady that's going to help solve the case. It was a lady that was short hair, nice eyes. He also mentioned there was going to be a television appearance, and after that, the crime will all be solved.
But is Diane right? Has Mark been killed and buried underwater? Were the police wrong in thinking he is just missing?
Myra was really taken back. I remember seeing her slumped in the chair, just couldn't believe what I just told her. And she said she was shaking with this tape in her hand, saying, I know what I'm going to do with this tape. I'm going to pass this on and get it to the police.
The next day, Myron sends the tape recording of Diane's séance to the police. It lands on Detective Daly's desk. But will it convince her that Mark is not a missing person?
Mark is telling me that he's not missing. He's been murdered.
Detective Marcella Daly is in charge of the missing person investigation.
I think on hearing the tape, my feelings were a little bit mixed at first. It's a very difficult thing to kind of listen to, but I thought it was important to remain open-minded.
He's saying he's got jeans on. He had a denim jacket on at the time that he was murdered.
She came with information with regards to location, interesting information connected to Mark's parents, but she also came up with information with regards to me, which was quite surreal, really.
There's a police officer, a lady. She's got short hair, lovely eyes.
And she described me as a key figure in the investigation.
On the tape, Diane can be heard describing Mark's appearance, his movements that fateful night. She tells of a blow to the back of the head and a burial underwater.
There were some elements that weren't what perhaps you would call guessable, You know, there was some information, some factual information with regards to this inquiry that we purposely kept out of the media. And Diane had touched on a number of these points.
Detective Daly asks Mark's parents' permission to contact Diane.
Approaching Alan Don about the information on the tape was a little bit difficult, but they felt like any information that was coming through on Mark, that it really needed to be looked at.
I had a phone call then from the West Midlands Police, Marcella Daly, and she was asking me, how do you know about Mark's murder? How do you know all these details? There's no way you could know all these details. She was very much taken back as well, and I felt I was being really questioned, big time. So I just answered as best as I could and tried to explain that I'm not a crackpot. Mark is in the spirit world, and he's given me the information.
Got very good vibes from speaking to her, and she seemed genuine and very supportive to what she wanted to help, and she agreed to come down to Birmingham to meet me.
I was really nervous when I was invited up, but pleased as well, because I felt I'm going to get closer to this. I'm going to help Mark to hopefully find his body and deal with it.
The involvement of a psychic medium was completely new to me, but she had vital information with regards to Mark's disappearance that really I couldn't afford to ignore.
Detective Daly decides to team up with psychic Diane Lazarus. She takes her to the place where Mark was last seen alive. Can she make a psychic connection with Mark and help convince Detective Daly that he has been murdered?
She felt a very strong feeling to walk in a particular direction, and that direction was actually supported by CCTV footage of Mark, and in fact it was actually the last footage that I had of Mark.
The CCTV here, just that one there, we've actually got a picture still of Mark just standing here actually chatting to somebody. We don't know who that person is and they haven't come forward.
I could literally see Mark ahead of me and he's saying, walk this way.
Diane believes that Mark is guiding her and Detective Daly along the route he took the night he disappeared.
To him. Mark literally showed me in great detail which way to walk.
Just want to go straight down here.
Okay. We said take a left here, take a right here.
Because to me, he's coming through really distressed at this point. And he keeps taking me as if he wants to sort of drag the both of us down this area all the time.
Quite clearly, I had an understanding of where Mark had gone, and Diane, without having that information, walked that route, and I followed her and listened intensely to what she had to say.
I don't feel he was alone. Somebody else was with him, and this guy that I feel is certainly not a friend that's with him at this point. It's as if he was staring Mark out. I kept looking at him, staring at him. It's as if he wanted me to see into his eyes, and I felt as if I was drawn into this guy's eyes. And he said, can you see what I've seen?
Walking with Diane as she was talking about how Mark was feeling, providing this information, it was quite unusual. Certainly the trained detective in me that was very much used to dealing with factual information was still remaining very open-minded. I didn't disbelieve her.
I was pleased by Marcella because she questioned a few times, but she took in all the information that I gave her, which was brilliant. And she accepted what I was saying. She didn't try and sway me anyway. She said, do you think he was here? How do you think he looked? Which way did you describe him? You know, all the right questions she should have been asking, really.
After 5 hours walking, Diane Lazarus and Detective Daly arrive at this housing estate in Birmingham's Highgate district.
This is definitely it, definitely.
And I remember actually getting to some flats, and he kept saying, Diane, here, this is the place.
The psychic connection is now stronger than ever. Mark begins to reveal the full horror of what happened to him that night.
He was really hitting him and beating him up. When Mark was pushed down and kept being pushed down, he had a blow here, right there, the back of his head. The impression he keeps giving me is that his head was put down.
But police have no information to suggest Mark would ever come to this area of Birmingham. He didn't have any friends here, and it's miles from his home.
It was really horrific. It was frightening. When I was actually standing there and hearing this information, it was unbelievable. I was looking in thinking, you know, where are you, Mark? He kept saying, you're not going to find me here, you're close, you're not going to find me here. But I'd been taken away, and I could see black bags being laid out. It was terrifying. For me, even, I was in a right mess, and I felt awful. And I thought, these people are going to think I am nuts to say these things to them now.
But the walk has a dramatic effect on Detective Daly. Her growing suspicion that something sinister had happened to Mark is now confirmed. She decides to upgrade the missing person case to a murder case. Diane Lazarus has done her job. It's been several months since Mark Green was first reported missing from home in Birmingham, England. With the help of psychic Diane Lazarus, police are now treating his disappearance as murder.
Because of some supportive information on the tape, as well as a very intense investigation, the decision was made quite quickly to upgrade the investigation to a murder investigation.
It's incredible, but a tape recording of a séance is being used by police to catch a killer. Using information provided by Diane Lazarus, police begin to search whole new areas of Birmingham.
Diane provided particular information with regards to locations and areas and materials that she felt were important, and that information formed part of my searching of areas.
It's an agonizing time for Mark's parents.
The waiting for Mark's parents was just completely devastating. Not only Mark's parents, but obviously key family members, and also Mark's partner at the time. And there was just no way of actually describing how completely devastated they were as every second ticked by, really.
But despite their best efforts, the police find no evidence of Mark.
It was very frustrating for me as an officer, the main officer in the investigation, not to find Mark when I felt so committed to finding Mark.
It isn't just Detective Daly who's growing frustrated.
The length of time that Mark was sort of waiting for this case to be resolved, it was actually frustrating for Mark. But in that time, I actually did his mum a reading, and his dad. And Mark actually told me that there'd be a television programme, and after that television programme, the whole thing would be actually solved.
This is the second time psychic Diane Lazarus has said a TV show will lead to the crime being solved. The first time was during the séance over 5 months ago.
When Diane spoke on the tape, she mentioned the use of media, a wide range of media, but also that we'd be attending a TV show.
Incredibly, in May 2002, Detective Daly is called and asked to take part in a talk show.
There's going to be a television programme.
With Diane's words ringing in their ears, she agrees to take part.
I certainly felt with regards to Mark Green that we really could not afford just to ignore it. I felt I had to justify to the inquiry, and I felt I had to do it for the parents.
And Marcella rang me and said there is going to be a television programme, and I was really taken back. I remember watching it and thinking, it's not going to be long now.
A very unusual step, but I felt it.
During the programme, Detective Daly is criticised for using a psychic in the investigation.
This was a real help.
It enhanced the investigation.
Yeah, I noticed you used a very kind of careful word there, enhanced.
It was quite critical of the approach that I had personally taken with the use of clairvoyance mediums. What I stress and what's important for any family that's considering this, that there are lots of people out there that will take advantage, quite clearly, but there are still people out there that have talent and do want to actually help people when they're in such a vulnerable state to find missing loved ones.
The broadcast comes as a shock to one man in particular. Scared that the police are closing in, he decides to save himself and step forward with information about Mark's disappearance.
A person called James came forward and basically provided information to say that his brother was responsible for the murder of Mark. And that he was responsible for helping his brother dispose of Mark's body.
I was pleased that this gentleman had walked into the police station and obviously said that he'd been involved in committing the crime. because it's exactly what I'd said. I said there was going to be a television programme, and from that moment on, I knew somebody was actually going to own up to it, so to speak.
Incredibly, Diane was right. A television show has brought a killer to the surface. But what did happen to Mark on the night he disappeared, and where is he now? James's brother, Robert McMahon, is a neo-Nazi with a history of violent crime. Police arrest and charge him with the murder of Mark Green. But despite intense questioning, Robert refuses to confess to the killing, but James does talk. He tells police that Robert killed Mark on the night of January 17th in his flat in the Highgate district of Birmingham, the exact location Diane led Detective Daly to months earlier.
I remember Marcella giving me a call up and saying that the place where I'd taken her was actually a spit away from where Mark had actually been murdered. So it was well worth going up to Birmingham and taking that walk.
Before this case, Diane Lazarus had no connection to Birmingham. There is no way she could have known either the area or Robert McMahon. So how did she come so close to the murder scene?
Weeks before, months before, I was standing in the spot thinking, I can't be in the right place, no way. And yet, that information was brilliant.
Sometime after the murder, Robert McMahon takes Mark's body by taxi to his brother James's house in Coventry, 50 miles away. With James' help, they bury him under a pond in the back garden, just as Diane had seen in her horrific vision months earlier.
When I found out that Mark's body had been buried under a water feature, it was just unbelievable. It just proves that Mark's detail was so phenomenal, really.
On June 7th, 2003, a forensic archaeologist is brought in to excavate the site. As each layer of soil is carefully removed and analyzed, a body is discovered. 12 hours later, human remains are exhumed. After forensic tests are complete, the body is identified as Mark Green, and the cause of death is finally revealed.
When Diane described how Mark had been murdered, and when Mark's body had been found and forensic information came to light, it was quite factual that Mark had been killed to a blow to the back of the head.
When I found out that Mark had died from a blow to the head, it was confirmation for me that Mark was giving me the accurate information at all times.
How did Diane Lazarus know where Mark was killed, the cause of death, a blow to his head, and that he was buried underwater? The information she gave to police is all well documented and far too accurate to be guesswork. Diane has only one explanation. Mark told her.
I really feel I've got a duty to the spirit world because I feel I'm employed by them, so to speak. So when I'm given information, I really try and act on it straight away.
At their trial, it takes just 1 hour for a jury to find both McMahon brothers guilty.
Robert was sentenced to life for the murder of Mark Green, and his brother James was sentenced to 2 years for helping dispose of the body of Mark Green. I think Mark's parents had basically been to hell and back with Mark's disappearance and murder. I think the case, when it came to an end and when the two were found guilty and sentenced, was a relief to both Anne and Don. But again, it just re-emphasised the great sadness and the great loss in their life.
But why did Robert kill Mark? Was it because he was seen leaving a well-known gay bar? Was this a homophobic attack? Or was he just in the wrong place at the wrong time? If this was just a random act of violence, would police have solved this case without Diane Lazarus' information? One thing is certain, Diane's prediction that a TV show would lead to the crime being solved did encourage Mark's normally reticent parents to appear on TV with Marcella Daly. Without that show, James McMahon may never have come forward and given evidence against his brother, Robert.
I think Diane was helpful in solving this case. She certainly enhanced the inquiry and provided information that led to a number of lines of inquiries and obviously with the end result of finding the people that were responsible for Mark's murder.
To this day, Diane says that Mark still appears to her. She feels he is one of her most trusted spirit guides.
He still comes through, I still have conversations, and he's fantastic, actually.
Drug trafficking as a career is fraught with occupational hazards, most notably violence, which in extreme cases can cause death. So when a father learns his wayward son has gone missing, he hopes for the best, but suspects the worst. And when the police can't find him, the father enlists the help of not one, but 2 psychics.
Now I got a sense right away that he was gone.
You're not looking for a living human being anymore. You're looking for a body, and a body can be anywhere.
But can anyone be absolutely certain, the police or the psychics, if the missing man is dead or alive? Back in 1994, Lawrence Embro was a businessman.
He was, for all intents and purposes, an upstanding citizen, a member of the community. He had a fiance. His fiance and he had were to be married in 3 or 4 weeks. So he had all the characteristics of a normal citizen.
Normal, except his business was dealing drugs. And apart from having a street name, Shaba, Lawrence Embro wasn't your stereotypical supplier.
The number one anomaly in this whole situation was that it didn't appear as though he actually used drugs or had any involvement in drugs. His lifestyle didn't depict that. His family relationships didn't depict that. It appeared as though his involvement was just that of business.
Apparently, Embro's plan was to make enough money to retire from the drug business, go straight, and start a new life with his fiancée in Dallas. But the best laid plans of mice and men.
Oklahoma City 911. Okay, and what's your name, ma'am? If you could just calm down, we've got officers on their way to help you out.
The call was from a woman who had been terrorized by thugs breaking into her home. The woman was Lawrence Embro's mother-in-law-to-be.
There were 3 people in the residence when the incident occurred. There was a woman, she's about 45 years old, and there were 2 children, 9.5 or 10 years old, where the door burst open, and these 2 individuals, both of them with weapons, immediately began striking her, forcing her to the ground, covering her face, loud abusive threats, threatening to kill her, dragging her and telling her, you know, don't look at me, don't look at me, forcing her to the back of the residence where the children were found. At the same time, we're asking, you know, where's Shaba's money? Where's Shaba keep his property, his stuff? Of course, they were dumbfounded by the request. They didn't know what to think, and of course the kids were terrified, and the mother or the woman was cooperative. They all were. As this continued, for whatever reason, and it appears to be just an opportunistic thing, one of the suspects took the woman to a different room and continued searching, and then at one point sexually assaulted her.
Apart from $40 taken from a piggy bank, the assailants leave empty-handed. When Evans interviews the victims, it becomes apparent that the men were looking for Lawrence Embro, but Embro is nowhere to be found. The fact that he doesn't return phone calls immediately raises suspicion.
Had it not been for the fact that the home invasion also included reference to him, there would have been some resistance to taking that kind of complaint or that kind of concern seriously. But given the fact that there was a reference made to him during the home invasion, and that coincided exactly with the time that you know they lost contact with him, it was obvious that they were related.
But in this case, because of the timing of Embro's sudden disappearance and the ransacking of his mother-in-law's home, Evans felt that there was an obvious connection. He called Embro's father and advised him to file a missing persons report with the Midwest City Police Department, the jurisdiction where Embro lived. Now there are 2 official police investigations. While Dan Evans of the Oklahoma City Police Department handles the home invasion, the missing persons case is assigned to Midwest City Detective Pam Gray. One of the first solid leads is the discovery of Embro's car, clean as the day it rolled off the assembly line.
A normal car is going to have prints unless somebody didn't want prints there, in which case That's a red flag. Everything indicated to me something had happened to Lawrence Embrough, that he had been killed.
About a month into the investigation, Detective Gray received a phone call from Lawrence Embrough's father.
He came to accept the fact that his son was probably dead, but he wanted the body. He wanted to be able to bury his son.
The father was so desperate to recover his son's body that he contacted a local psychic and wanted Gray to meet with her.
I said I would be willing to do anything because we kind of reached a stalemate, a standstill as far as the investigation. A lot of people were talking to the detective in Oklahoma City, and their indication to me was they had been advised not to talk to anybody else, including me. Oklahoma City was working one aspect. I was working the missing person on Lawrence Embrough. It's really kind of tough when you run into a stone wall.
Gray, who'd never worked with a psychic before, was in for a rude awakening from her colleagues.
Well, there was a lot of laughter, and I would constantly hear there was no reason for any comments to be made because they would all be humming the theme song to the Twilight Zone. Way out there, Earth calling Sky King, you know. Just rude comments, but you get used to it.
Unperturbed, Detective Gray went and met with psychic Nita Lee.
When I went to the appointment with Nita Lee, her first response to me was, "He's dead." I felt at that point that he was dead.
I said, there's 3 guys that did it, and one of them seemed to be smaller than the other 2.
Gray was really hoping for Nita to pinpoint a location.
And I said, he's northeast of Oklahoma City. There's an old tin barn where he is. I said, he can hear the train as it goes by. So see, his spirit was very much there with him.
A train, an old tin barn, and northeast of the city, not exactly GPS accuracy.
We're talking a lot of farmland, a lot of pasture land, a lot of ranches. The scope that Nita Lee gave me would have been impossible to walk it.
But Nita did give one other clue. She said the body was not buried. If this was true, it was in practical terms a plus.
We would probably have a better chance of locating the body than if it was buried. Because if it was closer to town, somebody would start smelling it. If it's out in the field, that possibility isn't going to exist. But hopefully somebody who owns some land or wherever would come across the body.
Psychic Nita Lee was able to at least narrow down the search area to the northeast of Oklahoma City. Will a second psychic's clues lead Detective Pam Gray to the exact location and bring a sense of closure to Lawrence Embrough's grief-stricken family? August 1994. It's been 3 months since Lawrence Embrough went missing. When psychic Nita Lee's predictions don't locate what everyone assumes to be a missing body, the father brings in another psychic, Dr. Sally Heading.
My rule is that if I'm going to take a crime case, I have to work with the law enforcement agency. Sometimes number one's for my protection, and number 2, sometimes there are things that I don't think the family needs to know. They're already in pain.
Sally never demands payment for her services, and with good reason.
Because you're not going to always see everything. You're not going to be able to read everyone or pick up on everything. And so if you have that kind of pressure on you, wouldn't there be the fear that you'd start making up shenanigans? You know, well, I really need that money and the mortgage overdue, so maybe this time I'll just fudge a little. So when your livelihood is not contingent on it, then you aren't under that pressure. And you could say, you know what, honey, I can't help you. I don't see a thing around you. It's an absolute blank. Or you can go ahead and do a reading and say, yes, I'm getting this, this, and this. And the same thing for the law work, because all of that is pro bono. I charge nothing. And I tell them my accuracy rate has been tested to be about 80%. If I knew when I was wrong, I would never be wrong. I don't have a clue. Not a clue.
Sally, who doesn't like to travel, works from the comfort of her home in California.
I didn't think right off the bat that he was alive.
It was a confirmation of what I already felt, what Mr. Imbro had come to feel, what Nita Lee had said, and now Sally Heading was saying it.
I had the sense, because there was money involved, that it was about selling drugs, and that there was a lot of anger around this money, that it was a deal that had gone wrong.
Once again, Sally and Detective Gray were on the same track.
Well, my thought was he hadn't got out of the drug culture, that either a drug deal had went bad, or he was involved in something else that somebody wanted to get rid of him.
One of the things I saw was a blue blanket. I knew they had not buried him. I saw a blue blanket over him.
In sync with Nita, the man is not buried. The blue blanket, a new and pretty specific clue.
I kept being shown flashing a metal sign that said Herefords on it. And I had the sense of prized Herefords. I also saw a barbed wire fence. I knew there was a gravel road. I could hear it. And I also knew that on the road going north, that there were poles all along the side of the road, telephone poles.
Sally is describing the rural area surrounding Oklahoma City exactly as Nita did.
I got a strong sense that people came up from Los Angeles, the 3 people, to meet another man. I had the sense that 3 were African American, and the 4th man was mixed, and that the 3 men were brought up to do Lawrence Monroe harm.
Now Sally is getting all these visions while sitting in her home in California, half a continent away from the crime scene, and the only connection with Detective Pam Gray is the other end of a telephone line.
Sometimes I'll see like flashes of images. Sometimes I'll feel as if I'm right there going through it, as if that person has walked through me or entered me and I'm walking along with them, or that they're holding my hand and showing me something. And sometimes it's not like hearing voices, it's from within. It's not like someone's whispering in your ear. Sometimes you'll hear a noise that might be connected with a crime scene or something.
I have to confess, I started imitating my fellow detectives humming the theme song of Twilight Zone. You know, I thought, I've got this phone call and I've got this woman telling me these things. And she's over 1,000 miles away. Yeah, right, you know.
I knew this was a woman who hadn't believed in Santa Claus or the Tooth Fairy for many, many years, and I think I was on that list, you know, of people to be debunked.
But I tended to believe, or at least have an open mind, because some of what she had told me was consistent with what Nita Lee had told me. But it was strange to me how people 1,500 miles away from each other were consistent in what they were saying.
You know, I really believe that's the exceptional police officer who will set their own belief system aside and do whatever it takes to solve that case. And I think she has that kind of intelligence and insight.
Sally's final prediction was astonishing.
The body's going to be found by deer hunters. It's going to be happenstance that they come upon this body, and there will be 2 of them.
Unfortunately, the notion of 2 hunters finding the body doesn't actually define or even narrow down a time frame. In Oklahoma, there's always some unsuspecting creature in season. Deer, dove, crow, rabbit, wild turkey, pheasant, quail, even squirrels are on the hit list. Detective Gray drives the general area northeast of the city, hoping Sally's clues will lead her to the body of Lawrence Embro. But even she admits it's a long shot.
You would have to have literally millions of people just walking side by side to cover every square inch. It's like the needle in a haystack. Hopefully you will see something, but the possibility of that are slim and none.
Sure enough, the search proves to be a waste of time. All the clues provided by both psychics yield nothing. But what if Sally Heading came to Oklahoma? Perhaps she could pick up more information from being in the general vicinity of the crime. But there is one small snag.
I really didn't want to fly here. No offense to lovely Oklahoma, but I didn't need to. I read energy. I don't need to be someplace else. Energy is eternal. It's the same every place. I don't have to be right there to pick up on the energy. So I didn't feel I had to fly in. I knew I would not be the one that would, oh, here he is, I got him.
Despite this, she reluctantly makes the journey to Oklahoma City.
I came in for the family. There's nothing anyone can do that feels like enough. And so that was the energy that brought me here, to help the family. Did I feel that they were being any difference? No.
Pam Gray, the detective charged with finding the missing Embro, is out of town the day Sally arrives. Detective Larry Beaver, who has never worked with a psychic before, is assigned to escort Sally around the city.
I was a little bit apprehensive, to say the least, but I was a little excited also. Having an opportunity to work with someone outside the field of law enforcement seemed like it was going to be, like I said, exciting to me.
I said, you know, once we get into Midwest City, I'll take over. I'll just tell you where to go, you know. Fortunately, we didn't end up in Cucamonga.
Beaver takes Sally to a known crack house on the outskirts of the city. The rumor on the street was that this is where Embro may have met his end. 2 years before Embro went missing, a mass murder occurred here. 5 women were stripped and stabbed to death. Sally picks up on the bad vibrations.
Wow.
Can't imagine everything that's happened here.
A lot of bad things. A lot of bad things.
While Sally was convinced this was not the location, for the first time she got a sense that Lawrence Embro was executed.
I had the sense of him going to there were stairs. I'm not sure now if it was upstairs or downstairs, but going into a building. He walked in, there were other men in there. Some of them he didn't know. There was the energy of hostility. He was anxious. I could feel that sense of anxiety, discomfort. You know, I don't want to be here. Like God, I'm outnumbered. Then I had this sense of gray around his face or neck. I wasn't sure if it was duct tape or if it was rope. I wasn't sure if they put him in a trunk or a back seat. I knew that they had not driven more than 20 minutes.
The cop and the psychic continued to search the area, keeping roughly within a 20-minute radius from the city. For Sally, the sense of being in the right place is almost tangible.
Now, ever since we pulled up here, I've had an overwhelming sense of déjà vu. And my definition of déjà vu is that you're on path, you're right where you're supposed to be, doing what you're supposed to be doing, that everything is exactly the way it's supposed to be, and that's the feeling I have right now.
As Sally had predicted, the visit to Oklahoma didn't produce a body.
Well, when we wrapped things up at the last location, I felt a little skeptical at the time, not knowing Sally very well and not knowing what to expect. Okay, fine, yes, we didn't find the body, but we found all these signs and symbols and things that you had predicted we would find. And you're telling me now that you believe that, you know, when hunting season starts, that the body will be found. I will just leave it at faith and see what happens.
What Sally had done to move the case forward was to narrow down the area where she thought the body might be found.
One person says something, you can kind of blow it off. 2 people say something, and where there were consistencies with what Sally Heading and Nita Lee, the prior psychic, had said, I was beginning to believe.
Detective Pam Gray's newfound faith drove her to action.
I contacted Lincoln County Sheriff's Office, and 2 deputies went out and rode this 450 acres of the land near where she had indicated his body was nearby.
The deputies find nothing. In November 1994, 2 men are out hunting quail. It's 30 days since psychic Sally Heading was wandering around these parts. It's also the last day of quail hunting season. The unsuspecting hunters make a horrifying discovery. It turns out to be the remains of Lawrence Embro, exactly as psychic Sally Heading predicted.
The body's going to be found by deer hunters.
And I said he's northeast of Oklahoma City, I
One of the
think.
things I saw was a blue blanket. I knew they had
There's
not
no tin
buried
barn where he is, and it has great
flashing a metal sign that said Hereford's.
I said, he can hear the train as it goes by, and he could.
I also saw a barbed wire fence. I knew there was a gravel road. I could hear it.
Every single clue provided by both psychics, Sally Heading and Nita Lee, turned out to be right on target. All the indicators were in the vicinity of where the body was found. Detective Pam Gray was blown away.
There wasn't any more teasing. There wasn't any more humming of the Twilight Zone. However, nobody wanted to come right out and say, hey, psychics are great, psychics are wonderful, you know, this is the answer.
With the discovery of Embro's body, police were now dealing with a homicide. After an exhaustive investigation, detectives were able to piece together what had happened.
The story was Mr. Embro gave approximately somewhere between $20,000 and $60,000 to an associate of his to go to California to pick up a load of cocaine. He reportedly bought a Lexus, went out to clubs, frequented ladies or women, and squandered all the money. To most dope dealers, they have to, or they're going to demand respect, because if they don't have it, they're not going to be able to do their work. If you don't respect them, you're not going to pay them. And a lot of dope dealers will front you dope. In other words, they'll give you the dope without the money on your word that you're going to pay them back. They only do that if they know you or if they respect you as someone in the business. If you don't have any respect on the street, whether you're a dope dealer, you're a cop, you're a doctor, or whatever, you're not going to get very far. There's no honor among thieves, but they do value respect very highly. They don't always earn it, but they value it.
The gentleman with the new Lexus was Steve Gray. Embro, who naturally wanted his money back, put the squeeze on Gray. Gray called his gang member friends in LA, including a man by the name of Isaac Johnson. According to Johnson, Gray wanted Embro off his case, to do what it takes to scare him into backing off. As payment, they keep whatever money they find. However, before they get a chance to confront him, Embro makes a surprise visit to Steve Gray's girlfriend's apartment. Little does he know, the gang from LA are inside.
Lawrence comes to the door, opens up his jacket, shows his gun, says he wants his money or he wants him. So Steve invites him inside, says, I've got some money, let me pay you something, I'll get you the rest later. As soon as he walks in the door, Isaac Johnson tells us that he punches him in the face and Lawrence Embro goes down. They then commence to beating him with their weapons and with their hands and feet until they subdue him. Lawrence Embro died from his wounds. The gang wrapped his head with duct tape, placed him in a blanket, and dumped him on the outskirts of town. The duct tape was exactly as Psychic Sally Heading described. The blanket, down to the color blue, was exactly as she described. Even Sally can't fully explain it.
I wish I could tell you how I know these things. How did I know it was a blue blanket? You know, I mean, there are a lot of colors to pick from there. Is it a lucky guess? Do you know there are times I've really wondered that seriously? Could these be lucky guesses? Am I just doing, randomly da-da-da-da-da? But it comes so quickly and so strongly, I don't believe so. The only way that I can come up with an explanation is that Lawrence was showing me where he was.
All the gang members were charged and found guilty in the murder of Lawrence Embro. Lawrence Embro was 29 when he was murdered. He had planned on going straight, getting married, and moving to Dallas. Unlike many in his trade, he wasn't a drug user. Apparently, he was simply tempted by the lure of making a quick buck, a temptation that cost him his life.